at 11 p.m. on GB News.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The worst week of rail disruption in 30 years begins today as commuters return to work.
Good morning and Happy New Year. It's 6 o'clock on Tuesday, the 3rd of January. This is Breakfast on GB News with Isabel, Webster and myself, Martin Dorgan. Here's what's leading the news this morning.
40,000 members of the RMT union begin their first two-day walkout of the week today as commuters return to the office, sparking fears people will give up on train travel for good. Our reporters have the latest from London and Birmingham.
New year, but same old news. The first of two 48-hour walkouts across the country this week. We'll have the latest from London.
And I'll be in Birmingham as disruption continues as the RMT walk out for another 48 hours.
And we'll also be speaking to the Transport Secretary, Mark Harper, just before 7 a.m. this morning.
As though it's better to keep us somehow as the villains. They've shown absolutely no willingness to reconcile.
Prince Harry has said he'd like his father and brother back in a trailer for a new interview airing this Sunday. The revelations come as the Duke of Sussex prepares to release his memoir, Spare, this time next week.
And the British Medical Association has warned that pressure on the NHS is intolerable and unsustainable. Ministers are being urged to take immediate action after a number of hospital trusts across the country declare critical incidents.
And we would love to hear from you throughout the programme as usual. We've just been catching up. We haven't seen each other since before Christmas, comparing notes on how our Christmas Day potatoes went. And you were telling me you did a Union Jack bacon on the top of your turkey.
Yeah, so I get the turkey, herb, lemon zest, garlic butter under the skin, Union Jack streaky bacon on top. That's the way to do it.
That's the perfect Brexit Christmas dinner.
You got it.
Let us know your thoughts this morning. Email us or tweet us as well. You know how to do it.
To our top story, 5 days of rail strikes begin today with 40,000 members of the RMT walking out as commuters return to work after the Christmas holidays.
The RMT strike will last until midnight tomorrow before another 48-hour walkout begins on Friday. ASLEF train drivers will also strike this Thursday, which will continue to significantly impact rail services.
Network Rail have said the combination of strikes will result in only about 20% of services running across the entire country this week.
Well, joining us now are our reporters Paul Hawkins, who's at Euston Station, and Jack Carson, who's at Birmingham New Street Station. Let's start with Paul. What's the picture like in London, then, in Euston, where you are particularly, first of all?
Right now, it's pretty empty, to be honest, but the picket line's just starting to assemble for another strike. It's the new year, a time for resolutions, but frankly, there's little sign of one right now, and it feels like the same old news that we've had for months, really. Another strike, this one lasting 48 hours. There's another one starting on Friday, another 48-hour strike. This is happening right across the country. And then on Thursday, you'd think, OK, there'll be some trains running. No, there's an ASLEF train drivers strike. So really, this strike affecting the whole of the week. As you say, only 20% of trains are running, and it is about the same issues as it has been throughout this entire strike. Working conditions, job security, pay. Network Rail saying that we're sorry to have to once again ask passengers to avoid using the railway this week. The Rail Delivery Group, which represents the rail franchises, saying travel if absolutely necessary. Mick Lynch, the boss of the RMT, which is where we are, where the picket lines are here at Euston in London this morning. Yesterday, speaking to the media, he said there's been too much disruption on the railway caused by government policy. He accused the government of sitting on its hands, and he said they keep saying that they're facilitating a deal, and I think it's absolutely the opposite to that. The government, for their part, through the Department of Transport, saying that it stands ready to facilitate a resolution to rail disputes, and it says it's time the unions came to the table and played their part as well.
And Jack, what's the picture like in Birmingham today?
Well, there's currently no picket line here. There's meant to be 4 for each of the train operating companies that operate out of here, as well as Network Rail as well. But trains here are running a very limited service, some running just 1 an hour, but only starting their services from around 7:30 a.m. till around 7 o'clock tonight. So not limited, very limited services. Avanti West Coast and Cross Country, 2 of the bigger, longer distance lines that run out of here to places where Paul is in Euston and all over the country. They're urging passengers just not to travel. In fact, they stopped actually selling tickets for the trains that are meant to be running today, and they're telling passengers to expect severe disruption. We don't really know when this disruption is going to end, because certainly between the RMT and Network Rail say they've put their best and final offer forward. Of course, it was a 5% pay rise backdated in 2022 and a 4% pay rise offered for 2023, but RMT members, when that was put to a vote, rejected that by over 50%. So it doesn't look like, certainly between the RMT and Network Rail, where this dispute is going to end. Of course, as Paul was saying, ASLEF go on strike again. There's going to be even more cancelled and more disruption here from New Street again when that happens, because outside of London, this is in fact one of the busiest stations in the UK. So people trying to commute here, people trying to get in for business and education as well, are going to be affected. In response to that Network Rail offer, Mick Lynch said that we resist that our members, along with the entire trade union movement, will continue their campaign for a square deal for workers, decent pay rises and good working conditions. Of course, one of the things that the RMT are campaigning against is the closing down of things like ticket offices, and they're rejecting the idea that they could be driver-only trains. So with those ideas and things still in contention, we don't really know when these strikes are going to end, and so for passengers today, disruption will continue.
OK, Jack Carson in Birmingham and Paul Hawkins in Euston. Thank you both very much indeed. Well, let's get some analysis here in the studio from the Assistant Editor of Conservative Home, William Atkinson. Happy New Year to you. Good to see you.
Thank you.
I say Happy New Year. Not a great start to the new year, though, is it, for workers? I mean, many people, having spent a lot of money on season tickets, not able to get into the office today.
No, quite. And I think the tedious ongoing campaign by the railway trade unions to continue to distrust people's working lives is appalling, frankly. Especially as we heard there, they are fighting a rearguard action against reality. I think especially over things like driver-only operated trains, for example, we've had the technology to put those in place for, I think, 3 or 4 decades now. They already operate on 30% of lines in this country, and they're used, across the world, from Denmark to Germany and elsewhere. And yet Mick Lynch and these tedious strikers refuse to acknowledge that that's the case.
On that exact point, though, I mean, is that the sticking point in all of this, do you think? Because there was a deal on the table, 4% over this year, 4% next year, and a guarantee of no redundancies. And that was pretty much it. We were told they almost had the deal done, didn't they? When ministerial involvement requested a look again at driverless trains. Is this the sticking point? Because Mick Lynch has come out and said, hang on a minute, we've been negotiating 7 months. You can't just at the 11th hour bring in a new element to the dispute.
Well, I wouldn't say it's necessarily a new element to this dispute. As I say, the ongoing row between the unions and the government, and indeed with the railway companies, who are primarily people involved in this, has been going on for decades. We remember also a few years ago the big dispute with Southern Rail was over the same issue. So I wouldn't say this is necessarily a new issue. I think what has forced issues onto the table even more is not only the current high inflation we face, but also the fact that since the pandemic, the usage of our railways is still down by about 20–25% on what it was previously. And at the moment, the income of the railway companies is twice, they raise twice as much from government subsidies as they do actually from ticket sales. So I think the government has a right to say, if you're expecting this much money from the taxpayers' purse, and if we're also going to continually hold up people's lives by going on strike, we should at least expect some efficiencies in answer to that. 16
million disrupted journeys, 80,000 trains cancelled, the worst strikes in 30 years, and Mick Lynch accusing the government of unprecedented ministerial interference. Surely it's time, and we keep hearing this from GB News viewers all the time, it's time for Rishi to get tough and take on the unions and get this mess sorted out.
Well, I mean, he's trying to do so, but I mean, how do you expect him to sort of bring down some great cluttering fist to make Mick Lynch disappear? I think we've already got on the table being discussed pieces of legislation that will bring us in line with most other countries in the world and having minimum staffing levels, which will prevent disruption of this level in future.
Away, couldn't it? Why is that taking so long?
Alas, that's how slowly it takes for legislation to be passed in this country. I know many viewers will want it to be faster, but one has to go through all the appropriate hoops. And also, as we've seen on everything from, say, retained EU laws to current asylum policy, there's an awful lot going through Parliament at the moment. So as important and as much as a priority as this is for the Prime Minister, there is an awful lot of other things he's having to deal with at the moment as well.
As the nation wanted to get back to work today but can't because of these strikes, and there's been a plea to recall Parliament to deal with the strikes and also the NHS crisis. Is it fair that politicians are sat at home enjoying an extended break when they could be back to work today sorting this mess out?
No, I'm not sure what recalling Parliament would actually do. Remember, of course, this is a dispute primarily between the railway companies and the Department of Transport and the railway workers, so I'm not sure what bringing MPs back to Westminster would actually solve it. I'm a great believer, actually, that MPs should spend as much time away from Westminster as possible, because the less time they spend in Westminster, the more they can do to actually cock up the country.
Well, except that we've got such a jam-packed legislative timetable. It's easy for you to say. And, recalling Parliament, admittedly, it's a bit late in the day now, because it would presumably be tomorrow before they could come back, and they don't sit on a Friday, so it would be 2 days. But 2 extra days to go through legislation. And as you say, there are all these hoops to go through in order to have the checks and balances, to bring us in line with other countries. We're already hearing that some of the sort of curbs that Rishi Sunak wants to bring in to try and reduce the amount of striking is already being watered down to make it more palatable to the Lords. I mean, there's time, isn't there? There's got to be more time for all this legislation. These huge, long holidays are untenable.
Well, I would say, potentially one can argue that we have an overstuffed legislative agenda. The wheels of democracy grind relatively slowly, and I think actually with all of this disruption in place, of course, it's actually rather difficult to get MPs back from their constituencies at any great speed. So, as I say, I think it's the Lib Dems who've called for this today. It is a natural response by an opposition party trying to create an easy headline, but I wouldn't do anything, I think, to actually speed up the process of delivering this legislation.
OK. William Mackinson, thank you for your input this morning.
Now, the Duke of Sussex has claimed that he wants to reconcile with the King and the Prince of Wales in a trailer for a new interview to be broadcast this Sunday.
It comes ahead of the release of his much-anticipated memoir, Spare, published a week today, and here's what we can expect.
It needed to be this way. The leaking and the planting. I want a family, not an institution. They feel as though it's better to keep us somehow as the villains. They've shown absolutely no willingness to reconcile. I would like to get my father back. I would like to have my brother back.
Joining us now for more is the royal and showbiz reporter Kinsey Schofield. Happy New Year to you. Lovely to see you. Please, somebody give him some advice if he wants his father and his brother back to stop chucking mud at them.
I mean, no reconciliation attempts. Isabel, did any of us really think that Harry and Meghan would be invited to the Jubilee after that Oprah interview? An Oprah interview that was done while Prince William was on his deathbed? Did any of us assume that they would have such a prominent role in the Queen's funeral? I mean, to me, you look at those instances, that is an example, that is action of an attempt at reconciliation.
Absolutely. And this idea then that there has been, the silence is a betrayal and all these allegations that he's making, just adding more fuel to the fire. I mean, when's it going to end?
First of all, Isabel, I just have to stress that, silence is a betrayal is complete plagiarism from Martin Luther King Jr. So in classic Harry and Meghan form, grabbing those great quotes from people that in leadership roles from the past, very few moments of originality from either one of them. I think that this is just that victimhood that has become so financially, so significant for them. They have got to continue on this path. Because they have realized that that's a lucrative platform for them.
So in the UK, Tom Brady of ITN is a journalist who's known for many years, Harry, and will do. But in the stateside, you've got Anderson Cooper, who's a bit of a legendary anchor. What can we expect from that? Is it going to be more of the kind of soft soaping Oprah treatment, do you think?
I do think so. We have heard that all of the questions were submitted to Prince Harry and his camp prior to the interview itself. Anderson Cooper, the Daily Mail reporting and Valentine Lowe reporting yesterday that Anderson Cooper actually has a history with the royal family. I think it was his great-great aunt had an affair with Prince Harry's great-great-uncle. So there is some history there, some unique history. But Anderson Cooper, this is a great get for him. And I do think that he is going to ask some pretty shallow, anticipated questions. If you missed the Oprah interview, all you have to do is watch the Harry and Meghan documentary. If you missed the Oprah interview or Harry and Meghan documentary, all you have to do is read Spare or watch 60 Minutes. They are telling the same stories over and over again, very little detail, very vague, and we're not getting a lot of real information from them.
I don't know. I wonder if Tom Bradbury, who is a respected journalist over here in the UK, will have to be quite... he will have to walk a very tight line, won't he? Tight path between being the friend and the person in favour of Prince Harry and asking the journalistic questions that all of us expect of him. He's the presenter of News at 10 on ITV. He's a big anchor over here. I think it is slightly different in the States. Anderson Cooper can perhaps be a little bit softer. But I'd be very surprised if Tom Bradbury doesn't push back. And I think in many ways that interview could be more interesting than the book itself. I hope so, anyway. Yeah. Proper journalism.
I agree. I mean, from what we're hearing, he is much harder on Prince William than anyone else, which is the sense we got from the Netflix documentary, which is surprising because in the Apple Plus interview that he did with Oprah Winfrey, he kind of targeted his father. So where was that switch? What is the objective of that switch? I think that that's interesting to see that, to figure out why he's changed direction. Is it because the Sussexes need that royal connection to further their American brand?
You've struck the nail on the head. It strikes me that they've gone for the highest scalp they can at the time. So when the Queen was alive, that was his father. Now his father is the monarch. It has to be his brother. I mean, there's a calculation. Is that not your view?
It's absolutely my view, and it's so unfortunate, Isabel, because if you've studied the royal family, you know that Prince William has spent the majority of his life protecting his younger brother from his mother's mistakes, from his father's mistakes, shielding his eyes and ears because he wanted to protect his heart. And he is truly going after the one person in the world that has tried to make his life easier. And I think it's devastating, and I think it really does hurt Prince William. I think it hurts him deeply. Unfortunately, or fortunately, we won't see that because he's an intensely private person. But Prince William has done everything in his, think about when Prince Harry came back from active duty, he was doing those press interviews. He was clearly frustrated. It was William that stepped in and pulled him back and told the media that the interviews were over. William has been fiercely protective of his brother, and to see Harry turn on him is deeply disappointing.
Well, Kinsey, the book Spare has already been marked down in price by quite a few major retailers in the UK. What's the anticipation of its arrival stateside? Are there going to be quite a few spare copies left there too?
Absolutely. Here in the States, it's available for free on Audible, on Amazon. If you don't have an Audible subscription already, you can get that for free. I do think that there is going to be a morbid curiosity with it. Like everything else, people are curious to see if he slams his family and if there are any specific details. But I don't think that it's going to be something earth-shattering. I don't think that this is going to be a positive element to his legacy. To continue to complain about the same thing for 3 years, it's time to grow up and move on.
The headline writer's dream, though, isn't it? Spare copies or spare us or
spare something else.
Yeah. It's lots of fun to be had with that.
Yeah.
Kinsey Schofield, always lovely to see you. Thanks very much for your time this morning.
OK, now let's bring you up to date with all the rest of today's stories.
2 British citizens were among 4 people that were killed in a helicopter crash in Australia yesterday. The couple, a 57-year-old woman and a 65-year-old man, were on holiday in the country when the accident happened. 3 others were left critically injured.
A record number of cancer patients were treated last year. NHS figures show more than 320,000 people received cancer care in the 12 months from November 2021, while more than 10,000 people were checked every day in the same period, with around 6% of tests resulting in a cancer diagnosis.
Brazilian footballing legend Pelé is due to be buried today. Thousands of fans have gathered to pay respects to his coffin, placed at the grounds of his former club Santos. Pelé lost his battle with cancer last Thursday. The 3-time World Cup winner was 82. And we can actually take a look at the live feed that is being broadcast around the world from Pelé's open casket, people filing past. And but you're a huge football fan. Are you surprised to see the level of, public grief, I suppose? And the natural comparison at the moment is with the Pope, who's also lying in state in the Vatican. Yeah, it's an interesting contrast.
Yeah, I'm not surprised, because to many football fans, Pelé was the version of the Pope.
He was a god in a way.
He's been called the god. He's been called one of the best players of all time. I tend to agree with that. And I'm not at all surprised. Epic scenes, and certainly if I was there, I'd be one of them.
Yeah, but, these open caskets, what do you think about it? I have to say I was sort of morbidly fascinated to see they had a veil over his face when they lifted the lid. It's something that we don't see, certainly in England. I know in Ireland there are still quite a few that do that, but it's shocking to me. And the same with seeing the Pope yesterday in all his glory lying in state in the Vatican. It's quite fascinating.
Well, I think there's a certain kind of cathartic facet about facing death like that, and understanding and appreciating and accepting what's going on.
Perhaps we hide death away too much, and to see somebody as peaceful as they are in that is helpful in the grieving process. Maybe you're onto something there. Let us know your thoughts about that and all of the rest of the stories this morning. We were just catching up, weren't we? We haven't seen each other until today over the Christmas period, and I'm on a bit of a health kick in the new year. A bit boring. I'm doing dry January. I'm eating hard-boiled eggs for breakfast.
And fizzy water.
And fizzy water.
And how is that? You're not normally much of a water drinker.
I'm not much of a water drinker, and I had to say, a colleague kindly showed me an article in the Times this morning that's saying staying well hydrated can keep you healthy well into old age and reduce the chances of dying early. Apparently, more than 11,000 American adults found that people with lower concentrations of sodium in their water, which indicated higher fluid intake, were less likely to develop chronic conditions. So there you are. Just as I'm beginning to think I'm over dry January already, on the 3rd of January. I've got to do it.
There's a lot of people, I think, out there that will be doing that. They'll be thinking, OK, I'm not boozing, so let's just drink loads of water.
Yeah, and your body sort of panics.
Yeah.
I'm sure it's a good thing to do, but you're not trying, you're not tempted.
I do like fizzy water, yeah. I think dry January is a time to stay moist with the water.
Oh,
just keep it going.
There you go. Your tree's still up, resolutely?
My tree is still up. I fervently obey the 12 days of Christmas.
Do you?
and that means it has to be down before the 6th, so Thursday is takedown day.
OK. I took mine down yesterday. I'd had enough, and actually the GB News tree came down as well. Did your tree come down yesterday? Let us know your tree woes, because, talking of all these funerals, the streets become a kind of cemetery for Christmas trees. It's a bit of a depressing
all the way
scene.
down the pavements, like a sort of graveyard of Christmas trees.
Takes councils forever. Maybe that's a new story with the cost of living crisis. It will take even longer than usual to sort out the trees. Anyway, let us know your thoughts this morning. We'd love to hear from you, the usual ways. Oh, and we're going to have the forecast as well.
After the break. Yeah.
Looking ahead to today's weather, and the UK's looking wet and windy for many, with bands of rain moving across the country. Let's take a look at the details. So starting across the southwest of England, we have some heavy rain, particularly over the hills and moors, and this will move eastwards accompanied with gusty winds, and that will be particularly near the coasts. It's also cloudy across the southeast with outbreaks of patchy rain with some heavier bursts. Temperatures above average, highs of 12 Celsius. Cloudy across Wales with outbreaks of rain, locally heavy, particularly in the west and across high ground, and some eastern areas will remain dry into the afternoon. After this morning's rains cleared, it will be drier for a time across the Midlands before the next band of rain arrives from the west during the afternoon, highs of 12 Celsius here as well. Any early morning rain will clear eastwards, but it will remain cloudy before a new band of rain already across western areas edges in for the afternoon, winds strengthening into the afternoon. The best of any sunshine will be reserved for the far northwest of Scotland. Further south, cloud and rain will move eastwards with some heavier bursts over the high ground. Meanwhile, across Northern Ireland, low cloud and outbreaks of rain will slowly clear into the afternoon. Winds will strengthen from late afternoon, becoming gusty, particularly near coasts, with gales later. So, remaining unsettled, with cloud and rain pushing through, the rain will become heavy and persistent over western hills as winds strengthen. And that is how your weather is shaping up this Tuesday.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prisons? I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamonn Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and tune-in apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8". My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. It's 6:26. Still to come on today's programme.
Just before 7 o'clock, we'll be asking the Transport Secretary, Mark Harper, what he's doing to avert the strikes as the worst week of rail disruption in 30 years kicks off.
And it's National Divorce Day, sadly. At 7:45, we'll find out why the number of divorced in 2022 was double that of the previous year.
It's really sad. So get in touch. Lots of you already doing so about Christmas this morning, and a lot of you sort of mixed reviews. They should keep those trees up, and other people are saying it's time to get them out. We were just reflecting in the break there that we can see a little bit of Christmas debris in the studio here. There's the odd sad little bauble.
Yeah, a little bit of holly berry over there. That's a bit forlorn.
Yeah, it does. It's a bit of a funny one, the 3rd of January. Anyway, get in touch the usual ways, gbnews@gbnews.uk, or you can tweet us at gbnews.
Well, something we look forward to tonight, because one of the most spectacular meteor showers of the year peaks this evening, offering stargazers an impressive display of shooting stars.
Astronomer and broadcaster Mark Thompson joins us now for more. Happy New Year to you. This is really exciting. How often do these sorts of events happen?
Well, do you know what? It is exciting. We get about 20 major meteor showers every year. The quadrantid shower peaks every year this time around the 3rd and the 4th of January, so it's a fairly regular occurrence. But the moon, quite often, depending on whether it's full moon or new moon, has a massive impact on what you can actually see.
It's Britain. It's generally cloudy at this time of year. What's the weather forecast looking like, and where do you think is going to be the best place? And what's the best time to see this spectacular event?
Do you know, annoyingly, the weather forecast is miserable. It's quite typical. Any time there's something decent to see in the sky, the weather's generally pretty awful in the UK. But we do get clear patches, and actually when you get lots of rain, that can actually be a really good time, because it can quite often clear the atmosphere out, and if you get little clear spells, you can get really nice views of the sky. The best time of the night is in the early hours, unfortunately, so it's in the hours after midnight tonight, around sort of 2, 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning before dawn, because you're then on the forward-facing side of the Earth, and that maximises your chances of actually seeing any meteors.
Fascinating. Well, we'll be all right then, Martin. That's the time we're strolling in here. We'll have a good look at the sky on the way in. What causes a meteor shower then? What's the sort of reason behind it? What's the science?
Yeah, I mean, typically what happens with most meteor showers is that we have these objects called comets. Probably remember Comet Halley, which we saw back in the 80s, which travel around the sun. They're just like great big dirty snowballs that are travelling around the sun, and as they do, they drop bits of debris around the solar system. And so when the Earth passes across the orbit of a comet, we just travel through all those bits of rock and dust, and we see those as they fall through the atmosphere, and they sort of burn up as they travel through, and we see them in the sky. But with this meteor shower, the quadrantids, it's a little bit unusual, because this is somehow, we're not quite sure how, there was an asteroid that must have been destroyed at some point, and it's actually the debris from that asteroid that we get to see over the next few nights.
Crikey.
So these are friendly meteors, if you like, but of course we all look at the movies, up in the air. Is there a chance at all, do you think, that an asteroid might strike us and wipe us all out like it did with the dinosaurs, or is this just the stuff of Hollywood?
Well, do you know what? Depressingly, yes, there's always a chance. However, adding a bit of context to that, we've got a number of monitoring systems that are constantly scouring across the skies, looking out for any such piece of debris which is large enough, or asteroid that's large enough to actually cause any real danger to us. So we're monitoring the skies quite a lot, and those that are there that we know about, there's nothing that poses any threat to us. So we're OK for the foreseeable future. That's
good to know. Mark Thompson, we were just talking about Christmas trees. I see you've still got yours up.
Yes.
You're going to be resolutely keeping your tree up for the next few days.
Christmas is without doubt the best time of year. If I had my way, I'd have the tree up until August when I take it down, ready to go up again for the next year. So yes, mine's staying up until the 6th. No,
fair enough. Listen, thanks very much for joining us this morning from Norfolk. Mark Thompson, astronomer and broadcaster. We appreciate it.
I like all that. There he is, a serious scientist, but still finding time to be jolly and festive.
Unapologetically so. I love it.
Well, look, after the break, we'll be going through the papers with Norman Baker and Emily Cobb. Please join us.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Deebs & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
Why not take us home with you by visiting the GB News shop at gbnews.store. You'll find all the official merchandise, a really good present actually for yourself, your friends or your family.
We ship across the UK mainland at no extra cost. GB News, the People's Channel.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Welcome back at 6:32. Let's bring you up to date with this morning's front pages.
And the Times focus on today's rail strikes. It says that industrial action could turn a generation against rail travel.
The Mail is focusing on Prince Harry's comments that he wants to get his father and brother back.
The Mirror, meanwhile, reports on the NHS crisis, saying its future is on a knife edge.
And The Star says we should be eating our Christmas trees for a New Year health kick. I think I'll be giving that one a pass.
Well, that story on eating a Christmas tree is one we're about to cover. I can't get my head around that. It's time to go through the papers now. Joining us this morning is the former Liberal Democrat Minister, Norman Baker. Happy New Year to you, Norm.
Happy New Year to you.
And the Conservative columnist at Conservative Home, Emily Carver, and, of course, a GB News regular anchor now. Happy New Year to you, my love.
Happy New Year.
Good. Let's start with you, Norm. Prince Harry, he wants his mother and father back, and he's doing it.
No, his father and brother.
Father and brother. That'd be very cool. Let's forget that one. He wants his father and brother back, and he's doing it on the front pages, and he's doing it all over ITV and American media.
And he's doing it in his book next week, Spare, which will be released. And I have to say, if he wants his father and brother back, he's going a rather strange way about it, because this must alienate them intensely. Look, I mean, he accuses them of betrayal, which is a very strong word to use for anybody. He says they present him and Meghan as villains. That may be true, they may present them as villains. And he also says Buckingham Palace is dishonest because it says it refuses to comment, but actually it's tipped off all its friendly journalists to put their versions of the stories out. All those things may be true, but this is a damaged person, I think, who's going on like this for years and years and years. How often can you say the same thing over and over again? Which is what he's doing.
Will pay you to do it.
Yeah, and indeed so. And also these interviews. I mean, we had that soft interview with Oprah Winfrey. Tom Brady is an old mate of his from 20 years ago, so he's not going to get roughed up by him, is he? This is just an excuse to promote his book. And at some point, he's got to just say, I'm going to move on in my life, rather than keep going back to this.
I hope Tom Bradbury will feel he, has his journalistic reputation at stake here. It's no good just because you've got an in with someone to sit there and pander to them. He has to have a rigorous interview for his own credibility.
Yeah. Well,
and if it is, which I hope it will, because I think he is a good journalist, it could be more interesting than the book, Emily.
Yes. I mean, I'm not too... Well, I anticipate that it might be a bit similar to the Oprah Winfrey interview, where it was very softly, no real questions, no pertinent questions anyway. No comeback on some of the claims. But he says that the family have treated them like villains, or it suited them to keep them as villains, Harry and Meghan. And the same could very much be said vice versa, really. Yeah. I mean, they could say that very much about... the royal family could say that very much about Meghan and Harry. It very much suits them. It's how they're making their money. And, you know, I'm sure the press is to blame somewhat in how it, you know, potentially bullied them a little bit. But, I mean, it's all sounding rather pathetic and sad at this moment, and I can't think it's very nice for them to be so isolated.
I just find it astonishing that Harry is accusing the royal family of using the press, when all he ever does is use the press against them.
They both use the press, to be honest with you. Buckingham Palace has always used the press, and it has done over the years. So, you know, a plague on both your houses. The description from CBS is that the book Spare is going to be explosive. The question is, in whose face is it going to blow up?
And all of this is so sad. And we were talking to Kinsey Schofield about how Prince William has been so protective of Prince Harry through their childhood, through all of those traumas, and to see this relationship break down so publicly and obviously so one-sidedly as well, because we know Prince William is a considerably private person compared to Harry, who can't seem to keep any thoughts to himself. It's tragic, just a family tragedy, really.
It's just a tragedy, and it's tragic for the royal family. It's quite damaging for the royal family, and the best thing that can be said about it from their point of view is get Prince Andrew out of the headlines.
But I mean, it's quite extraordinary that now Meghan is going to release a memoir. I mean, talk about... she has such a victim mentality. It's absurd. She is not a victim.
No.
She may be a victim of some social media trolls. That's about it at this point. She really has had the most fantastic life as she was able to pursue her talents. Then she joined a family where she had the most immense privilege. Now she gets to make huge amounts of money off making very vacuous podcasts. But what angers me the most is that a lot of people from my age and younger see them as victims. And I don't understand why they still see them as victims. It seems like you can, if you weep and wail and talk about buzzwords like structural racism or unconscious bias or bullying or whatever, suddenly you can be a victim even though you have hundreds of millions of pounds.
Yep, here to that. Emily, let's stick with you now. As a journalist of 27 years, I've been reading this headline for many a year. The NHS is on a knife edge once again, this time the front page of the Daily Mirror today.
Yes, so if you remember yesterday, one senior medic said that 500... I don't actually have the Mirror with me. That's not very helpful.
We've got one here.
Yesterday, a senior medic came out to say that it could be 500 people are dying every day because of problems within emergency care and all those waiting lists and the backlog and everything that's slowed down since the pandemic and before. Now another top doctor is sticking the boot in, saying the NHS is on a knife edge and that the government has to do something. They should register some kind of crisis mode for the NHS. And so it seems like, yes, the medics are rallying, the top dogs in the medical world, to say that the government must act in one way or another.
Yeah, although there was rowing back on that figure, wasn't there? Chris Hopson, the NHS England Chief of Strategy, urged caution about the claim, saying we don't recognise those numbers, and pointed to Germany, Italy and Spain, all seeing high mortality rates at the moment due to a number of combination factors, including the backlog, but also this rise in COVID and the twindemic, as it's being described.
Yeah, we have to be sceptical about these random numbers that could be plucked out of nowhere, but I think it's quite clear to most people that there are many excess deaths at the moment, and part of the reason why that will be is because of those waiting lists, because of the backlog, because of late diagnoses, because of the not being able to get into A&E. There was a story of someone waiting 99 hours to be seen by a doctor in accident and emergency. So it is pretty appalling, but what I would say is the Mirror has... said a lie. Years of cuts in the NHS. That is simply not true. The budget in real terms has increased year on year since 2010, so it's worth just flagging that.
And Norman, your party, the Liberal Democrats, are today saying that Parliament should be recalled to deal with this. Is that the right way to go?
Well, I understand it's a political point to make, and I think the Labour Party's made a similar point. I don't really see it's going to achieve very much, to be honest with you, to recall Parliament. I'm quite sure what Parliament's going to do if it is recalled. I mean, there is a serious issue here, but it's a systemic issue. I mean, Emily's right to say the budget's gone up in the last 10, 15 years. But NHS inflation, as we know, is greater than normal inflation in terms of, new drugs come on place or new technology comes to the NHS, which costs more money. So you have to go way above inflation to keep pace, and that's not happened. But I think the main problem, which is the systemic problem here, is that the care system doesn't work properly, and you've got people effectively bed blocking. You're not supposed to call them bed blocking anymore, but it's what it is. People not being discharged into care homes, which is then causing a backlog at A&E, backlog in the GP surgery and everything else. That's got to be sorted out. And until we sort out the care system, this will carry on.
Well, it's not just that, though, surely. I mean, none of us have mentioned the fact that the workforce is burning out.
That's also
they have
true.
a problem with recruitment. And,
Yes.
and all of them, well, not all of them, junior doctors are voting on the 9th, but we've got paramedics and indeed nurses for the first time out on strike.
Yes.
And the government could do something about that.
It could do something about that, yes, and it needs to do something about that because it's taken we'll come on to rail strikes in a moment, it's taken quite a hard line on strikes. And actually, I'm not sure that strategically, politically, or ethically, that's the right thing to do.
OK, so on to that story now. It's a really interesting take on this. I wonder how much of this just ministers being mischievous, saying that the strikes will precipitate basically people breaking the cycle of even using the trains. Is it just political spin, or could that happen?
Well, look, this is the story on the front page of the Times. Millions will shun trains forever. When you read the story, this is an unnamed government source saying this. This isn't actually an independent assessment of what's going to happen. But look, I mean, the fact of the matter is that people did abandon public transport during COVID because they felt it was unsafe. Wrongly, actually, because it was perfectly safe, but they went away from public transport. They've not all come back. There's still people who think buses are unsafe and aren't using them. And you've got the train service falling to bits, like on the West Coast Main Line. There aren't enough train drivers, have been trained over the years, so the service is rubbish. So, of course, some people are now reverting to the car. But, of course, that can't carry on forever because that will just cause massive congestion. So the government needs to understand to meet its net zero targets, apart from anything else, it needs to sort this problem out.
I think it's true, though. I would not buy a season ticket now, and that's how they make their money with these commuter routes. Absolutely no way. Because you can't trust. And if there's no trust in the service, then you won't use it.
Well, what if you were living in a commuter town and the alternative was having to drive and park and pay all the congestion charges and everything else? I mean, people are, in a position where they have to buy these tickets, as you say.
Well, I think a lot of people who live in commuter towns, yes, some people will have to rely on the train, but fewer and fewer people are needing to.
Well, they'll work from home more often.
Yeah,
what people are doing now, and this is why the strike is less effective than it might be, people will say, OK, there's a strike on Tuesday, I'll work from home on Tuesday.
But not as a former transport minister, there's a dichotomy here, because for a long time there's been a war on the car, there's been a war on motorists. Let's get people on public transport. Now they can't depend on it. That cycle's been broken.
Well, I wouldn't agree there's been a war on the motorists. If you look at the cost... No, well, if you look at the cost of fuel duty over the last 10, 15 years, you'll find it's gone down relative to the cost of travelling by train and gone way down compared to travelling by bus.
Petrol duty, ULEZ,
fuel duty has been frozen. It's been frozen, and it's actually been cut last year, whereas the cost of travelling by rail and bus has gone up far more. So I don't agree there's been a war on the motorist.
OK, let's move on to the FT this morning, their front page. They've spoken to 100 economists who predict that the recession will be the deepest and longest, which, for the return of the new year is pretty depressing reading.
It's a very depressing read, and what's also more depressing is that the UK fares really badly compared to other G7 countries, the weakest recovery in the G7 this year. The 2023 recession will feel much worse than the economic impact of the pandemic, as one independent market economist says. And some of this, has to be said, and won't be very popular with your readers, is down to Brexit.
Well, hang on, that makes no sense at all. This will be worse than the economic impact of the pandemic. We're living through the economic impact of the pandemic. That's nonsense from the FT.
I don't think it is nonsense. I mean, what they're saying is that there's certain factors which are common to all G7 countries, one being the pandemic, one being Ukraine, but the reason that Britain is faring worse than the other countries is because of Brexit. That's what's happened here.
But if they're saying the economic impact, but they've said that the economic impact of the pandemic is what, over?
No, they're not saying it's over. They're saying the recession will feel much worse.
But what about the fact that we're not energy self-sufficient? A lot of the European nations are. I mean, France can run its nuclear energy.
Yes.
You know, Germany much more energy self-sufficient. We are hamstrung by net zero. Isn't that part of it?
Well, we're not hamstrung by net zero, because if we'd gone to net zero 20 years ago, we'd be entirely independent, self-sufficient on energy.
OK, I'm going to interrupt you. I'm so sorry, Norman. We have the Transport Secretary standing by. A very good morning to you, Mark Harper, and a happy new year, if I can call it that, given the state of the strikes that we're going to see this week. Lots of commuters will be hugely frustrated, and presumably many of them directing that frustration towards the government for not resolving all of this.
Well, look, good morning and a happy new year to you. Well, look, I think if I'm going to put the government's position, we've actually been very involved in this. Since I became Transport Secretary a couple of months ago, I've met with the union leaders, we've changed the tone of the discussions, and the Rail Minister had a number of meetings with trade unions, met with trade unions and the employers before Christmas, and has continued to have conversations across the Christmas period, and we're working very hard to facilitate getting these strikes sorted out. For example, I made sure that an offer was put to rail unions. Two of the unions accepted that deal on Network Rail. The RMT, about a third of their members did vote for it, even though they were instructed not to. But they're still not willing to settle what is a very fair and reasonable offer. So look, government's going to continue to work really hard to try and help bring the two sides together to get this resolved. I know how frustrating this is for commuters, and the danger is it puts people off using the railways, which is a bit of self-harm on the part of the rail unions that haven't settled this dispute.
I mean, there isn't any evidence to suggest that will happen, but I just want to pick up on the point you're making about the meetings that you had before Christmas and the offers that they were advised not to accept by RMT. Mick Lynch has described it as an unprecedented level of ministerial involvement in these discussions, and particularly on the point of driverless trains being brought in at the 11th hour, taking objection to that being brought into the dispute after 7 months of no mention of it.
Well, look, on the issue about driver-only operation or driver-controlled operation on trains, that's not a new thing. That's been happening on the rail industry since
But did it or did it not interrupt the deal
50,
that was being put on the table at the beginning of December?
No, look, this is not a new thing. 55% of passengers on the railways travel on services where there are driver-only operation. That's not a new thing. Government's been talking about reform of outdated working practices all the way through this process. Government has tried to facilitate a deal. I made sure that there was an improved offer that went to the trade unions. It's a fair and reasonable offer. So on Network Rail, two of the trade unions actually settled and their members voted in favour of taking that deal. I think it's a very fair and reasonable one. Those conversations have taken place between myself and the unions and the employers and the Rail Minister. I think the ball's in the RMT's court to get back round the table and off the picket lines. That's the best way we could start the new year for commuters who want their railway to be back up and running.
Well, Mr Harper, we have 16 million disrupted journeys, 80,000 trains down, record low opinion polls for the Conservative, but there was a glimmer of hope at the weekend. 30% of voters are still undecided about how they're going to vote. And certainly here at GB News, our viewers tell us all the time the best way of getting wavering Tories back on side is to take this battle to the unions and do a Maggie Thatcher. When will Rishi channel his inner Maggie?
Well, look, I think what people want to see is to get these disputes sorted out, and on the rail network is to get the rail network back up and running again, and that's what we've been trying to do. So look, the deal has to be done, the detailed negotiations have to be done between the employers, so that's the train operating companies and Network Rail and the trade unions. The government's job on behalf of the taxpayer, who after all has subsidised the railways massively during the COVID pandemic to make sure that rail workers continue to have a job, weren't furloughed, none of them lost their jobs. That's a big investment from the taxpayer. What I think the government can do is make sure there's a fair and reasonable offer on the table, which there is, facilitate those negotiations between employers and trade unions, and try and make sure we get this dispute resolved for the travelling public. That's what I'm going to be doing, that's what the Rail Minister is going to be doing. The ball's in the union's court to get off the picket line and back round the negotiating table.
Harper, I want to ask you about what's been described as a personal priority for the PM, and that is the NHS. You only have to look at the front pages this morning to see the state of it. We're hearing more and more very senior medics coming out and decrying the situation. We were told 500 deaths a week due to delays in A&E yesterday. We're hearing the situation is worse than at the COVID peak. The BMA saying it's intolerable and unsustainable, this level of pressure. And 7 hospital trusts have today declared critical incidents. What is the government doing today, right now, to sort this out?
Well, actually, it was what the government was doing before Christmas, actually. So in the autumn statement, the Chancellor recognising the pressure that the health service is under, partly because of the usual winter pressures, partly due to the high level of flu, but also because of the pressure that's still there from the backlog of all the patients that weren't treated during the pandemic, found a huge amount of extra investment, £14 billion for health and, importantly, social care, and £500 million specifically to deal with getting people who are well out of hospital and able to be looked after at home or in a social care setting. That was done in the autumn. Ministers are working at pace to make sure that money gets to the front line. I recognise it's very tough and challenging for those on the front line of the health service dealing with the backlog arising from the pandemic, but the government's made those resources available. We've got extra doctors, extra nurses, record amount of investment in the NHS. That's the government's job, and it's for health service managers now to turn that into practical action on the ground, and ministers remain willing and able to do what they can to help.
Well, the front page of the Mirror today is saying the NHS is in crisis, or a knife edge. It's been in crisis for most of my life. I wonder if the answer isn't just endless more money or fiddling while Rome burns, but an actual root and branch overhaul of the NHS to sort out its gross inefficiency is well overdue. Would you not agree?
Well, look, you do need to look at how we do things differently. And one of the things, for example, we've done is looking at getting some of the delays from the pandemic by having community diagnostic hubs to look at how you can diagnose people more quickly, more efficiently, to make sure that big investment of taxpayers' money is turned more effectively into hospital treatments. What people care about actually isn't the amount of money that's going in. What they care about is what's coming out at the other end in terms of how quickly we can treat people. That's why to deal with those backlogs, we have had success because we've got rid of nearly all of the people that were waiting over 2 years. Now we're working on making sure that no one's having to wait longer than 18 months. We're driving down those backlogs arising from the pandemic. But it does require a huge amount of work from those on the front line, and I know that they are under pressure at the moment through the winter because of particularly the rise in flu infections. So anyone listening to this that hasn't gone and got their flu vaccination should absolutely go and do so to help reduce the pressure on the health service.
And meanwhile, we're expecting yet more strikes in the health service this month. Junior doctors voting to decide on whether they take action on the 9th. We've got nurses going back on strike on the 18th and the 19th, and then paramedics on the 11th and the 23rd, and Steve Barclay refusing to even discuss pay with the RCN. Extraordinary situation.
Well, no, look, on the situation about pay in the health service, look, we value the people that work in the health service. That's why we have independent pay review bodies that take evidence not just from ministers, but also from health unions. All of the health unions and the professional bodies give evidence, and those pay review bodies this last year recommended higher, actually, than the government had set out in its submission to those pay review bodies, but the government accepted all of those recommendations in full, and that's the pay offer that's been made to unions, and obviously the process for this coming year's starting, and the government will listen very carefully to that, but we accepted all of the recommendations of the independent pay review bodies. I think that's the right way
starting,
to set
and you're
pay
recommending
in
a
the
cap
health
at
service.
2%, which a lot of people will be outraged by.
No, that's not what we're doing at all. That isn't correct. I think all that's happened in the Health Secretary's letter is he's drawn attention to what the government's inflation target is. He hasn't set a cap for the coming year at all. That's not the case. The government will look at what the independent pay review body says for the coming year, and you can look at what we've done on the past record. This last year, the pay review body made recommendations across the board, and the government accepted them all in full, and I think that's the right way to set pay in the health service.
OK, Mark, it's a new year. We need some hope. If you're going to send the New Year message to Mick Lynch today, what would you say to him?
Well, look, I think my New Year message to Mick Lynch would be make a New Year's resolution, get off the picket line, round the negotiating table, and let's get these damaging strikes to an end. There's a fair and reasonable payoff on the table for the people you represent, Mick. So let's get round the table and let's see if we can get the dispute sorted out.
Well, Mark Harper, thank you very much indeed for your time this morning. We did have our newspaper reviewers standing by for a bit of analysis, but we're out of time. We'll get more from them just after 7:30. We're going to take a quick break, but first of all, here's your forecast, and we'll be back with you at 7 o'clock. Looking ahead to today's weather, and the UK's looking wet and windy for many, with bands of rain moving across the country. Let's take a look at the details. So starting across the southwest of England, we have some heavy rain, particularly over the hills and moors, and this will move eastwards accompanied with gusty winds, and that will be particularly near the coasts. It's also cloudy across the southeast with outbreaks of patchy rain with some heavier bursts. Temperatures above average, highs of 12 Celsius. Cloudy across Wales with outbreaks of rain, locally heavy, particularly in the west and across high ground, and some eastern areas will remain dry into the afternoon. After this morning's rain's cleared, it will be drier for a time across the Midlands before the next band of rain arrives from the west during the afternoon, highs of 12 Celsius here as well. Any early morning rain will clear eastwards, but it will remain cloudy before a new band of rain already across western areas edges in for the afternoon, winds strengthening into the afternoon. The best of any sunshine will be reserved for the far northwest of Scotland. Further south, cloud and rain will move eastwards with some heavier bursts over the high ground. Meanwhile, across Northern Ireland, low cloud and outbreaks of rain will slowly clear into the afternoon. Winds will strengthen from late afternoon, becoming gusty, particularly near coasts, with gales later. So, remaining unsettled, with cloud and rain pushing through, the rain will become heavy and persistent over western hills as winds strengthen. And that is how your weather is shaping up this Tuesday.
I'm Camilla Tominey. Join me on GB News on Sunday mornings for a politics show with personality on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
This year on GB News, we've got brand new members in the family.
Join us. Across the entire United Kingdom, we cover the issues that matter to you.
GB News will always stay honest, balanced and fair. We want to hear whatever is on your mind.
And we don't talk down to you.
The establishment had their chance.
Now we're here to represent you. Britain's watching.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio or online, every morning it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
worst week of rail disruption in 30 years begins as commuters return to work.
A very good morning to you. It is 7 o'clock on Tuesday, the 3rd of January. It's actually a whole year today since we launched this programme.
Happy anniversary to you.
Thank you very much. This is Breakfast. It's GB News today with Isabel, Webster and Martin Daubney. Here's what's leading the news this morning.
40,000 members of the RMT union begin their first two-day walkout of the week today as commuters return to the office, sparking fears people will give up on train travel for good.
We'll be live from train stations around the country with our GB News reporters Paul Hawkins and Jack Carson.
And Prince Harry has said he'd like his father back in a trailer for a new interview airing this Sunday. The revelations come as the Duke of Sussex prepares to release his memoir, Spare, this time next week.
And the British Medical Association has warned that pressure on the NHS is intolerable and unsustainable. Ministers are being urged to take immediate action after a number of hospital trusts across the country have declared critical incidents.
And there's loads to talk about this New Year's morning, so get in touch in the usual ways via Twitter or email gbviews@gbnews.uk, and please let us know where you're watching or listening to us from.
So good morning to you. Our top story today, 5 days of rail strikes begin with 40,000 members of the RMT walking out as commuters try to return to work after the Christmas holidays.
Yeah, the RMT strike will last until midnight tomorrow before another 48-hour walkout begins on Friday. ASLEF train drivers will also strike this Thursday, which will continue to significantly impact rail services.
Well, Network Rail have said the combination of strikes will result in only about 20% of services running across the entire country this week. Earlier, we spoke to the Transport Secretary, Mark Harper, who told us the government was trying to quickly solve the dispute.
We're working very hard to facilitate getting these strikes sorted out. For example, I made sure that an offer was put to rail unions. Two of the unions accepted that deal on Network Rail. The RMT, about a third of their members did vote for it, even though they were instructed not to, but they're still not willing to settle what is a very fair and reasonable offer. So look, government's going to continue to work really hard to try and help bring the two sides together to get this resolved. I know how frustrating this is for commuters, and the danger is it puts people off using the railways, which is a bit of self-harm on the part of the rail unions that haven't settled this dispute.
Well, joining us now are our reporters Paul Hawkins, who's traded in the Qatar World Cup for Euston Station, and also Jack Carson, who's at Birmingham New Street Station. So, Paul, let's start with you. Looking quite forlorn there in London this morning.
Yeah, morning, Martin. Morning, Isabel. Yeah, in fact, I'll be honest, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 workers on the picket line, and there's frankly more members of the media here at the moment, but I'm sure that the numbers on that picket line will grow throughout the day. It's a new year, but it feels like old news because it's another rail strike, and the reason why this one is significant is because there are two 48-hour strikes this week, today and tomorrow, and then another one starting on Friday, and then on Thursday you've got another strike by the ASLEF union, and their members tend to be railway train drivers, I should say. So effectively this strike is lasting all week, and it is again about pay, job security, reforms to working practices, and that's why they're on strike. And really the issues haven't changed since this dispute started 6 or 7 months ago. In terms of disruption, only 20% of trains will be running across the network this week, according to Network Rail, who say we're sorry to have to once again ask passengers to avoid using the railway this week. And for the Rail Delivery Group, they're the body that represents the rail franchises, they're saying travel only if absolutely necessary. Now, the RMT, Mick Lynch, who's the General Secretary of the RMT, who's just over there actually giving a few interviews, has said that there's been too much disruption on the railway caused by government policy. He's accused ministers of sitting on their hands, and he said that they keep saying that they're facilitating a deal. I think it's absolutely the opposite to that. The Department for Transport, though, says that it stands ready to facilitate a resolution to rail disputes, and that it's time the unions came to the table and played their part as well. But at the moment, even though it is New Year, there appears to be no resolution in sight.
Well, Paul, we've just been speaking to Mark Harper, the Transport Secretary, and he gave us a message to deliver to Mick Lynch. So we'll let you go and deliver that message to him, and perhaps you can grab him for an interview as well for us. And in the meantime, we'll cross over to the West Midlands, to Birmingham, to speak to our Jack Carson. Good morning to you again, Jack. What's the picture there? Media outflanking the picket line here in London. Is it the same in Birmingham?
Well, I'm the only media currently here, and there's no picket line, so I guess that is the case. Here in Birmingham, the very limited services have just about started running at 7 o'clock this morning. Then they're only going to be running until just after 7 o'clock tonight, 1 per hour for some local routes here. In terms of the longer distance ones, from train operating companies like Cross Country, Avanti West Coast, which run two of the main lines out of here, they actually stopped selling tickets for the services running on the days of disruption. And they're telling passengers that have got tickets to only travel if absolutely necessary and to expect severe delays if they do. We don't really know when these strikes are going to end, because Network Rail, so they've put their best and final offer forward to the RMT, a 5% pay rise which was backdated for 2022 and a 4% pay rise for this year, but that was taken to the RMT members and then rejected by about over 50% of them. But Mick Lynch says that they are looking for a negotiated settlement, but they resist that us and our members, along with the centre entire trade union movement, will continue their campaign for a square deal for workers. Of course, some of the things that Network Rail are thinking about introducing and other train operating companies, of course, are driver-only trains, looking into the future driverless trains, and the RMT saying that that's just not something that they're willing to agree to. And so while these negotiations continue to go on, Mark Harper saying get off the picket line and come back to the negotiating table to try and sort out the deal.
OK, well, Paul Hawkins at Euston and Jack Carson, a solitary, what I would say, pioneering figure there at Birmingham Street. Thanks for the latest updates.
Well, let's get the latest on the nationwide situation with the travel correspondent Simon Calder, who's also at Euston Station. Sounds like lots of people at Euston this morning. Mick Lynch as well. Good morning to you. Look, we spoke to the Transport Secretary earlier, who claimed that this driverless train argument has been around for years. The evidence from Europe is that it works extremely efficiently and it's been around for decades. But it's a fact, isn't it, that this was brought into the negotiations at the 11th hour and derailed, if you've pardoned the pun, any idea of a resolution at the 11th hour. And here we are stuck in this sort of loop now.
Yes, and let me be absolutely specific about what this driver-only operation means, OK? It is, the rail industry has some ludicrous terms, but let me just tell you that a vast number of people travel every day on trains with only a driver operating the whole thing. So, for example, the entire London Tube, many other local metro services. But what the government is doing is wanting, and they most definitely threw a very large spanner in the works when we thought that talks were going to settle at the end of November. They want to expand it. However, the union, it likes it to be inferred that you would get on a train and there wouldn't be anybody there, and it could be going hundreds of miles and it would be really difficult. But in fact, mostly it is about changing the role of guards so that they would become more kind of customer focused and the driver would open and close the doors. It's been a subject of intense upset and argument and strikes for decades, but there's plenty of it around and there will be more. It's just a question of what the price is that the union extracts from the from accepting a bit more driver-only operation. Meanwhile, yes, as these pictures are showing, the problem for the rail industry is that there aren't any passengers today because there's very few trains running, about 20%, mostly on the intercity lines and some short distance commuter ones. First train from here goes to Northampton at 7:33 if you want to catch it. Services will be wrapping up by 6:30. On Thursday, the day of the ASLEF strike, then this station is going to be completely closed, as will many others around the country. Although, oddly, in Wales, you'll get a reasonable service all day long. The effects will drag on of the RMT's 4 days of strikes well into Sunday, and then possibly next Monday we might see for the first time a full rail service across the UK. But whether we'll be any closer a negotiated settlement is anybody's guess.
Simon, something we spoke about last week is on the front page of the Times today. A ministerial source claiming that millions will shun trains forever because the bond will be broken between the ability to rely upon trains. Do you think that idea has any merit, or is it pure government spin?
Oh, look, every day it is unarguable that people will reluctantly say, well, I cannot possibly rely on the rail industry. I mean, you can't actually plan anything more than 2 weeks ahead if you were planning a trip to see loved ones or maybe heading for London to go to a West End show. You can't plan more than 2 weeks ahead because that's the minimum warning that the unions must give on further strikes. And let me give you some numbers. RMT members working for Network Rail by the end of this week would have been on strike for 20 days out of the past 200. They have lost, obviously, thousands of pounds. There's been an overtime ban, and an awful lot of people have lost money from that. But I've just spoken to Mick Lynch, and he says, no, absolutely solid. Things will continue, but it is the passenger who is caught up in what is effectively a huge industrial dispute between the unions and the government, and confidence being eroded every day. Great news for car manufacturers. Good news for bus operators who have been keeping going all the way through. Terrible news for those of us who depend on the railways.
Absolutely. All right, Simon Calder, thank you very much. We've had an email in echoing those thoughts. Sian from Sussex saying, I think these rail strikes are disgusting. I have to leave 2 hours before normal to get a bus to work now. With no trains, I still won't get to work on time. I work full-time. I get less than 20 grand a year, and they get a lot already. It's selfish. It's stopping people getting their wages. My friend can't get to a funeral on Friday because of these strikes. So many messages like that this morning.
I want to hear from Paul, who says British train drivers are the highest paid in Europe. Bite the bullet and replace them. People are fed up with it.
Yeah, keep your thoughts coming in this morning. More doom and gloom, though, this morning on the NHS. Medics are warning that the health service is on a knife edge as critical incidents are declared in hospital trusts across the country.
It follows a warning from the country's top A&E doctor that delays in the NHS could be the worst on record.
Well, our national reporter Theo Jacumba joins us now for more. Theo, bring us up to date.
Yes, good morning. It's the second day we're hearing about some of these critical incidents, and health bosses are concerned about where the service is going, particularly this year, and of course what we've had over the last couple of months. We've heard it being described to similar levels what we saw before the pandemic started, and during that period of patients coming in with COVID, and then adding on top of that what people normally come into hospital with. Where we are this morning is in Hertfordshire, outside of the East of England ambulance service, where they've declared a business continuity incident for the second time in a number of weeks from December to where we are now. And what this means is that they want to ensure their resources are focused on patients with the greatest need, as well as allowing to access wider support from their health and care partners. And this has all come around at a time when they've received high 999 calls and hospital handover delays. So they are saying at this moment in time, it's a difficult time for them, particularly trying to keep on top of all those 999 calls and working with the hospitals as well.
Theo Jacumba joining us there from West Hertfordshire Ambulance Station in Hemel Hempstead. Thank you very much for that update.
Well, let's now get some political analysis from the Assistant Editor of Conservative Home, William Atkinson. So, William, hello again. You listened to what Mark Harper said earlier. He's firmly laying the blame at the door of Mick Lynch again. Are we ever going to get anywhere? This is just going to be the longest Mexican standoff in British history.
Well, yes, it might be a relatively long Mexican standoff, but I would say it's a necessary and worthwhile one. You know, we raised the issue earlier of driver-only operated trains, and I think over the last year, or at least up to March 2022, the average household, whether they even took the train or not, subsidised the railways to the tune of 500 quid ahead. So I think it's entirely within the government's rights to raise these issues about making the railways cheaper, more efficient. And I think your viewers are exactly right when they say we've got some of the best paid train drivers in the world. and we've had the technology to do without them for at least 30 years. And so, therefore, I think they should face the facts. And they are members of the anti-growth coalition, as Liz Truss would have once said.
That's the problem, though, isn't it, in all of this? I mean, there's reports on the front of the FT this morning about how slow our economy is recovering in the G7. All of this has a huge impact on our economy. It's not just people who can work from home and are relatively unaffected. There are all those people who can't get to the hospitals, they can't get to their jobs. This has an impact on our economy.
Well, exactly, and I think voters see that. As far as we can tell from the polling, the longer these strikes go on, the more actually voters have chosen to blame the railway unions themselves than they do the government. And it's actually quite interesting when you look at the figures, despite the fact he has so many cheerleaders on the left, Mick Lynch is actually quite unpopular with the general public. His approval ratings, I believe, are worse than Rishi Sunak's. And I think the railway...
There's something shouting about, isn't there? I mean, to be fair.
Well, no, exactly. But I think that shows just how bad one could say his ratings are. And I think that the public do see this through the lens of their own personal experience. You know, we heard there from people who can't make it to funerals, they can't make it to work.
Yeah.
And to have, you know, railway officials who were already on very good salaries, who already have very good pension deals and the like, and in many cases jobs for life, turning around and saying, no, I want to get an even larger above inflation pay increase at a time when everybody's feeling the squeeze, I think is outrageous.
But, William, should the government tough it out when it comes to the strikes in the health sector? Because there is a different view from the public, isn't there? There's a lot more sympathy for nurses worst paid in Europe, unlike our train drivers, the exact opposite. People want their loved ones to get the best care they possibly can. And they're seeing, you know, nurses saying that they are burnt out. We're seeing the struggle to recruit them, people leaving the sector in their droves, and the situation on a knife edge, as it's being described.
Well, I wouldn't necessarily agree on that, of course. The number of number of nurses in the NHS is actually 9% larger than it was before the pandemic at the moment. They're not actually having as much of a struggle with recruitment as it's often made out. And also the pay increase that the NHS, the nurses are asking for is of 19%, which is not only far larger than other ones being received in the public sector, but also much larger than most people are receiving in the private sector and is simply unaffordable. I think certainly when, in the hope that inflation comes down this year, we can look at a pay settlement, we can see perhaps a settlement of some sort around the March budget. But I think all of this has to be seen through the lens of the public finances, which the last year especially showed are quite fragile at the moment. And frankly, though I have a lot of sympathy for anybody seeing their pay packet being squeezed by inflation, which is a cancer and a menace, one also does need to remember that we almost blew up the economy only a few months ago, and so one wants to avoid that again if possible.
So, William, you'd been given a glimmer of hope at Conservative Home this weekend, seeing polls that 30% of voters are still sitting on the fence. They're just not sure who to vote for. But we hear all the time from our viewers that the number one way Rishi Sunak could shore up some support is to get tough on all this stuff. Get tough on the unions, show some leadership and stop sitting on the fence himself.
Well, the problem, I think, with people simply asking Rishi Sunak to get tough is what that actually means in practice. You know, we've seen under both Boris Johnson and Liz Truss, leaders who are able to talk a good game on all this stuff, but then actually failing to deliver. What Rishi Sunak's team are trying to do, and I think what they're doing quietly and quite competently, is actually laying the groundworks to properly deliver on all of this stuff over the next year. So I would say to your viewers who are worrying that Rishi Sunak doesn't take this stuff seriously, he definitely does. But he would rather, I think, as Teddy Roosevelt said, speak softly and carry a big stick, rather than go in and shouting about it and not actually do anything for voters.
Superb. Thank you. William Eckerson, Assistant Editor, Conservative Home. Thanks for your input.
Right, with the time at 7:18, let's bring you up to date with the rest of today's top stories. And 2 British citizens were among 4 people that were killed in a helicopter crash in Australia yesterday. The couple, a 57-year-old woman and a 65-year-old man, were on holiday in the country when the accident happened. 3 others were left critically injured.
A record number of cancer patients were treated last year. NHS figures show more than 320,000 people achieved cancer care in the 12 months from November 2021, while more than 10,000 people checked every day in the same period, with around 6% of those tests resulting in a cancer diagnosis.
The Brazilian footballing legend Pelé is due to be buried today. Thousands of fans have gathered to pay respects to his coffin, placed at the grounds of his former club Santos. Pelé lost his battle with cancer last Thursday, and the 3-time World Cup winner was 82.
And the Duke of Sussex has claimed that he wants to reconcile with the King and the Prince of Wales in a trailer for a new interview to be broadcast this Sunday.
Well, it comes ahead of the release of his much-anticipated memoir, Spare, published a week today. Here's what we can expect.
Needed to be this way. The leaking and the planting. I want a family, not an institution. They feel as though it's better to keep us somehow as the villains. They've shown absolutely no willingness to reconcile. I would like to get my father back. I would like to have my brother back.
Well, let's speak to the Royal and Showbiz reporter, Kinsey Schofield. Very good morning to you. Happy New Year. Look, I suppose the elephant in the room, if you want your father and you want your brother back, perhaps stop slinging mud at them.
Isabel, are you not having flashbacks of Thomas Markle on international television begging for a reconciliation with his daughter, and then Harry and Meghan criticizing him for taking it to the public? I mean, it's the hypocrisy is astounding. Does he not see? Does he not hear himself?
Absolutely. And the hypocrisy, the suggestion that there has been absolutely no attempt to reconcile from the royal family, when, as you've pointed out, they were given absolute front and centre roles at the Queen's Jubilee, when the Duke of Edinburgh was on his deathbed, and also at the Queen's funeral. Yeah.
Truly, I mean, I think with Harry and Meghan, sometimes our issue as the public is actions speak louder than words. And they talk a lot, but their actions say completely different. Whereas the royal family, their actions are saying, here's an attempt at reconciliation. We're going to invite you to the Jubilee, despite the fact that you were gossiping and tearing the family down while Prince Philip was on his deathbed. And then once the Queen passed away, I mean, we know now that they were recording this reality show. They were writing this book. These are things that were very disrespectful to the monarch, and the family still include them in these activities, which to us, I mean, looking outside, looking in, that looks like an attempt at reconciliation.
Mm-hmm. So the interview with Tom Bradby on ITV, we're expecting some good stuff from that because he's a serious journalist, although he has known Harry for years. But there's also a big showpiece with Anderson Cooper, the American anchor, coming up. Are we expecting much more of an Oprah-style, soft-soaping approach, or are they going to go for the juggly, do you think?
You know, here's what we do know. We do know that Harry and Meghan's team requested to see the questions beforehand, so Harry's had plenty of time to prepare. I do not think that Anderson Cooper is going to ask very tough questions. It's interesting that Harry chose CBS, and let me tell you why. This is the second time he's gone with CBS. The Oprah interview was on CBS, but keep in mind that CBS was the only outlet in the United States to show pictures of Princess Diana dying in her vehicle, the only outlet. And at the time, both Harry and William condemned CBS for showing that image. They said that that was traumatic for them. So it's interesting that Harry would allow CBS to get this exclusive, don't you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's just riddled, isn't it, always with hypocrisy. But we were talking to Norman Baker. He's reviewing our papers this morning, but he's also something of a royal expert, having written books on it. And he said this allegation from Prince Harry that they had been leaking stories, the institution had been leaking stories, could possibly be true. But that sort of his view was a plague on both your houses, because you're both at it. There he is, also planting stories to the press and briefing against the royal family. In many ways, it's just, you know, there's probably a lot of truth in what he's saying, but just stop saying it on air all the time.
Well, I also think when you're saying something like that, what you're doing is you're giving those stories credibility. So are you telling us that Meghan really is a bully and that the palace leaked a story that Meghan really did make Kate cry? Are you upset that those stories are being leaked because there is some truth to some of these negative stories about you and your wife?
Yeah.
Well, Kinsey Schofield, thanks for your input today. I wonder, just quickly, what's the interest around this book, Spare? Because there's a lot of copies going spare in British retailers, that's for sure.
Let me tell you just really quickly, American media is aggressively turning on the Sussexes. And while I do believe that there will be a morbid curiosity surrounding this book, you are seeing some of these outlets like Variety and Newsweek. They are really kissing up, that used to kiss up to them. They're turning on this couple. So I don't know if it's going to be the explosive book like Princess Diana's was.
OK, Kinsey, thank you so much for your insights and analysis. We always like the American insights as well. Appreciate it. See you again soon. I just want to read out this review that has come in from Irene. Good morning to you, Irene. She says, "Get a life, Harry. If it was me, I'd never trust a moment with him ever again. He has made his bed. so he should lie in it. And I should say, lots of people echoing that sentiment this morning. If you do want to speak out in defence of him, let us know. I'm happy to try and balance some of the views throughout the course of the morning. But, you know, at the moment, it seems to be most people, as Kinsey is saying, stateside as well, pretty fed up with them.
I think Irene's nailed it. Well, after the break, Paul Coit will be here with all the big sports stories as thousands pay tribute to Brazilian football legend Pelé.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Deebs & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
Why not take us home with you by visiting the GB News shop at gbnews.store. You'll find all the official merchandise, a really good present actually for yourself, your friends or your family.
We ship across the UK mainland at no extra cost. GB News, the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8". My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Welcome back. It is 7:28. Still to come on the programme this morning.
It's National Divorce Day at 7:45. We'll find out what's behind the sharp rise in divorce in 2022.
Yeah, we're both feeling smug because we managed to get through Christmas without any major rows. Thumbs
on.
up. 8:45 with The Apprentice returning this week. We'll be speaking to former contestant Thomas Skinner, a bit of a man about town. He was fired, of course, by Lord Sugar. We'll get his views on the upcoming series.
Bit of a ledge. And you can join in any of our discussions by emailing gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet at gbnews. Please get involved. And a very happy new year now to Paul Coit, sports legend, top man on the island. How you doing?
Happy New Year. I'm very
That's
good.
an introduction, isn't it?
It wasn't bad. I thought it was going to continue. I was just sitting there enjoying every moment of it. I'm not used to that.
Don't milk it, Corty.
OK,
let's start with the funeral procession in Brazil. Pelé being almost laid at rest, almost in state, with an open casket.
Yes.
Fans filing past in there, many, many thousands.
Yeah, exactly. I'm just looking at the time now. So it's like 4:30 in the morning in Brazil at the moment, and there are fans that are still filing past, as we say. The funeral is today, and the casket is laying there, and obviously the outpouring of love and grief, as you imagine, because Pelé being so huge, not only across the world but of course, in Brazil. And there we are. That's Santos Stadium there. That's the Vila Belmiro Stadium, which is probably changed over the years. The last game that Pelé played there was back in 1974, before it had this really bizarre move to New York Cosmos. Yeah. Because the story there, I mean, this is a separate story, but New York Cosmos, they started playing soccer, as they called it in the States, which used to play in Central Park, tiny club. And they brought Pelé in, which was the huge story. And then they built from there. And this was years later, but George Best went there. So when he left Santos, in the stadium, now there's a really interesting story, is there's a secret locker of Pelé's. I say secret because if you go on a tour around the stadium, you're shown this locker. Now, they redeveloped the whole of the dressing rooms, but kept this locker safe. So what happened back in 1974, when Pelé left, he put something in his locker and locked it, and it's been kept there ever since.
What is it?
And nobody knows.
Wow.
And nobody knows. It's said that something was put in there to give the team luck as he moved away because that was his home, etc., but nobody's ever opened it. Now, he also said that it couldn't be opened until he's no longer here. Now, I don't know whether anybody's now racing to get into the dressing room and go, let's find out what it is, whether it's going to be like the Al Capone 2 many years ago, this secret stuff, or the Blue Peter Garden when we've got to dig something up and we find what was there all these years on. I'm not think I'm going to liken Pelé to that. But what it is, we don't know. But there's something that he's kept in the locker that was kept in there from 1974, which is still there to this day, and nobody knows what's inside.
Well, I think we now need to know what it is. We definitely need to know what it is.
But what do you do? Do you leave it now? Do you pay respect and think, well, we'll just keep it there forever? Or they have to get permission from Pelé's family to be able to say, can we now open it
Someone
and see
will
what's inside?
snaffle it away and sell it in a few years' time, won't they? Paul, can I ask you about Martina Navratilova, 18-time Grand Slam singles champion, and she announced yesterday she's got cancer again.
Yes, I mean, she's announced that it's throat and breast cancer. I mean, the words that she's used, she said it's a double whammy. I mean, it sounds more than a double whammy. She said it's serious but fixable. It's going to stink for a while, but I'll fight it with all I've got. We know it's stage 1 throat cancer. So, again, early diagnosis, as we know in cancers, is so important, and it has been diagnosed early. It was caught at an early stage, and it was a lump on her neck that she noticed at a tennis tournament in November, had it checked out and found out exactly what it is. So, you know, obviously, there we are. Look, we're going back a few years there. This is her playing. I would say that looks like Sue Barker back in '77. I think this is probably is. Back in the very early days of playing at Wimbledon. But obviously we wish her well. Early diagnosis, obviously very important. But
I'm sure she's got an excellent standard of healthcare, and we send her our very, very best wishes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just quickly on some domestic football. Nightmare for Liverpool.
Nightmare for Liverpool. Brentford were terrific. And it was a nightmare for Liverpool. Just when Liverpool looked like they were going to be back, playing well again, winning 4 on the trot. Go to Brentford, and Brentford out-muscled them. I thought they were absolutely terrific. Brentford up to 7th. They're only 2 points behind Liverpool now in the Premier League, so looking very good. The Old Firm derby as well, Rangers 2, Celtic 2. People saying, well, that's a good result for Rangers, but no... Not winning in an Old Firm derby is never a great result. It keeps Celtic 9 points clear, so it's pretty much unassailable.
And a great result for Forest at the weekend.
I thought you may mention that.
1-1 Chelsea. The fight back begins here. New year, new start. Come on, Corty.
I love the fact that you're celebrating drawing 1-1 at home. So it just says a lot about how your support with Nottingham Forest is. Can't wait. We're going to do it. We drew 1-1 with Chelsea. Okay.
Small mercies being a Forest fan.
You've got to take what you can. Got to take what you can.
Always a pleasure. Never a chore. Paul Coit, lovely to see you. Thank you very much indeed. We're going to take a break. After that, we're joined by the very lovely Norman Baker and Emily Carver as well. We'll see you in just a moment.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prisons? I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us. We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB+ radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Well, welcome back. It's 7:38 and let's bring you up to date with all of this morning's front pages now.
Here's the Times focusing on today's rail strike, saying industrial action could turn a generation against rail travel.
The Mail focuses on Prince Harry's comments that he wants to get his father and his brother back.
The Mirror reporting on the NHS crisis, saying its future is on a knife edge.
And somewhat bizarrely, the Daily Star says we should be eating out Christmas trees for a New Year health kick.
Ever since lettuce cam, you just can't really take them seriously, can you? Look, we had the Transport Secretary, Mark Harper, on around an hour ago, and the paper reviewers very kindly stood by in case we needed to come back to them, but we ran out of time. But we want to get their analysis, especially from Norman Baker, who was, of course, in the Department of Transport for a time as well. That is Emily Carver and Norman Baker. Let's, though, first of all, hear a clip from that interview where we talked to him about this week's rail strikes.
We're working very hard to facilitate getting these strikes sorted out. For example, I made sure that an offer was put to rail unions. Two of the unions accepted that deal on Network Rail. The RMT About a third of their members did vote for it, even though they were instructed not to. But they're still not willing to settle what is a very fair and reasonable offer. So look, government's going to continue to work really hard to try and help bring the two sides together to get this resolved. I know how frustrating this is for commuters, and the danger is it puts people off using the railways, which is a bit of self-harm on the part of the rail unions that haven't settled this dispute.
So, Norman, you were itching to come in during that interview.
I was. I like Mark. I was in the Home Office with him, and I think he's a good minister. He's competent, and he talks a good case, does he not? We saw that earlier on. He didn't answer your questions, by the way, Isabel, your pertinent questions. For example, the bouncing in at the last possible moment of the driver-only operation. Yes, it's been around for a long time, and yes, there's a lot of sense in it, but it was bouncing at the last minute, which is bound to upset the RMT. So was that done carelessly, or was it done deliberately to undermine the negotiations? And what Mark, of course, can't say and didn't say was that there was a deal on the table between the operators and the unions which was going to end up with acceptance. But it was undermined, I think, by number 10, not by Mark, who said you can't pay this. And that's why the unions are so upset, I think, because they've had their negotiations undermined by number 10, of course, who are well in the shadows and don't come forward and say anything. And Mark's left holding the baby.
And Emily, I wonder that other point you mentioned, the front page of the Times today, that millions will shun trains forever because of breaking that bond of trust with the train operators. Do you think there's any merit in that, or is that just government spin?
Well, I do think there is, and we've seen that people are using the railways less anyway. Those ticket revenues haven't gone back up to where they were, ticket sales anyway. People are changing the way they use rail. People are working from home more. I do think that I am more on the side of Mark Harper than I am on Mick Lynch on this one, because I think they are refusing to keep up with the times and their demands for no redundancies. There is no business in this country that would be able to say we can't have any redundancies till 2024. It's just unfeasible for most people, and most people who think about it sensibly will realise that is quite a demand just on its own. And then around the working practices, etc., I think they're living in the past. I think Mick Lynch is a little bit of a dinosaur, actually.
Garth says, OK, fine, let's give the rail strikers an extortionate pay increase, but let's withdraw taxpayer subsidy and see how they face real economic...
Well, quite, and it is Mark Harper's job and the government's job to look at things in the round and to actually consider the taxpayer in all of this.
There's a statistic. 1 out of 10 people use the trains, but 10 out of 10 benefit. Because if the trains weren't there, the roads would be completely jammed.
Yeah, well, build more roads.
And they've also got... The Department for Transport's own analysis shows building roads generates more traffic.
I don't believe that.
It absolutely does.
If you look at the South East, if you added another... another lane on some of our roads, it'd be fantastic.
No, the evidence, Emily, is that when you build more roads, you get people making journeys who wouldn't otherwise make.
OK, so if we get rid of all the roads, then yes, no one will be able to drive.
I'm just saying that you can never build your way out of a problem. Look at Birmingham. Birmingham's got more investment in roads historically than almost anywhere else in the country. Some of the worst traffic jams.
Why don't we just not do the newspapers and let
well, then you may as well have no lanes at all.
No, you just have to have a balanced transport policy which doesn't involve road building. Road building, you can't build your way out of a problem.
Well, I'm sorry, but if you have an increasing population, you need more ways for people to get around. And, Norman, not everyone wants to ride a bike.
I'm not sure. I'm sure they don't, actually. But you can get 75 people in the bus. That's 75 cars off the road.
OK, but some people have to deliver children.
Yeah, they do. They do.
Luggage. You can deliver children in bikes, just to say. Anyway, let's not have too much... I love a ding-dong. I really love ding-dongs. But I also want to have a good look through the papers with you whilst we've got you.
Yes.
We've done this story quite a lot this morning. Norman, do you want to start? You've chosen the front page of The Guardian, talking about the conflict in Ukraine. Well, and Moscow admitting big losses, actually, after a missile hit.
And it hasn't done this before. And it says 63 people were killed. The Ukrainians say 400. I think the interesting aspect to this is that, apart from the admission, was that when Putin went in, he was expecting to take over Ukraine in a week. And now a year on, and they're mired, which shows the old historical truth. It's easier to start a war than to end it. But what will be the consequence of this? Is it going to lead to Putin being destabilised and a resurgence of, if you like, liberal policies in Moscow?
Or is it going to be even people who are even worse than Putin taking over from Putin? You know, the far right taking over from Putin, the people who actually want to go and bomb and use nuclear weapons. What's going to be the consequence of that? And so it's worrying, in a way, as to what's happening inside Moscow. We don't really know that yet.
I wonder what the public appetite is, Emily, for sending endless millions or billions even to the Ukraine when we can't even make our trains run and we can't even get a GP appointment. Do you think the public's getting wearisome of this war?
Well, I do wonder if Putin will actually be overthrown from within, and yes, if something worse could happen. In terms of how the public feel, I think it's very difficult. I think most people do see this as a battle for liberal democracy when they look from the outside in. However, there is huge amounts of money going in. People are worried that it will be long and protracted. It already has been. Some people are saying this year the solution will be found. It will be over. Either Ukraine will win decisively, Putin will back down, there will be some kind of settlement, some kind of peace talk. But it's not looking particularly likely.
No.
And the poor Ukrainian people living without power, living without heating, in the freezing winter. I mean, it really is just terrible.
Yeah.
OK, let's move on to your first story here, Emily, about ski. There's no snow on the Alpine.
This is a very, very middle-class story. Yes, this is an exclusive. I have a world ranking.
Do you?
Do you?
I do. Not a very good one.
What's that?
I used to do the slalom and things.
Fantastic. Oh, wow. Love it. Right, well, this is a serious story. I mean, look...
I just outed myself as
the middle-class slant on it all. This is ultimately a story about climate change, isn't it? And the mild temperatures on New Year's Day and Christmas Day and the impact that's having on a middle-class hobby.
Potentially, yes.
But on other things as well.
This is the analysis of skiing. Apparently, half of slopes currently are closed in France. France is one of the main destinations for British skiers. People have turned up. None of the slopes are open. Some of these resorts, particularly the ones lower down, of course, are having to just shut up shop. Absolutely miserable, particularly as at the start of the pandemic, the ski resorts were accused of bringing back, skiers were accused of bringing back the pandemic from the resorts in Europe. So they've had a bit of a dodgy ski season that year and then the next year. So it's all a bit miserable in the Alps. And the analysis is that because of warming temperatures, some of these ski resorts will never open again. Or
show the picture that is inside the Times. I don't know if we've got it, or otherwise we might have to hold it up, Emily.
Yeah.
It's just this tiny little slip of snow down the middle of the valley, surrounded by ultimately verdant green slopes, which is not what you want when you've spent a small fortune on high...
There we go, the little slope in the middle made of artificial snow. You wouldn't really want to pay, you know, hundreds of pounds for a ski pass, would you?
No, exactly.
For that?
Apparently lots of injuries as well due to the slushy, dodgy conditions at the moment.
Well,
hospitals full of broken wrists. And
for skiers at home, they'll know that slush is not particularly good, and you can get stuck and you can be propelled forward, and this seems to have happened to one of these skiers who's died sadly on a piste because of the slush, apparently.
Well, my son is currently learning to ski on an artificial slope.
Fantastic.
So there are ways around it. Norman, can we go on to... What's this? The robots are revolting.
This is an incredible story on page 7 of The Sun, right at the bottom, a tiny little story. But, I mean, I suppose if it's true, it's quite profound.
Yeah.
Which is that boffins, I love that word, don't you?
Yeah.
Boffins...
Would you consider yourself a boffin?
No,
A transport boffin?
Transport expert, not boffin.
Okay.
Boffins have got white coats.
Okay.
Boffins reckon robots will outnumber humans in just 20 years' time. And 49% of these boffins reckon that robots would, quote, destroy mankind and end up ruining the world. Seems like a big story to be on the bottom of page 7.
Yes.
Yeah. And presumably the robots will outmanoeuvre the boffins first.
Presumably they will, take over. They'll be robot boffins.
I hate it. Our children are never going to do homework properly, are they? They're just going to have their entire assignments written for them by bots, and no one's going to use their brains ever.
I mean, do you find it hard to get your children to read?
Yeah, actually. Yeah. I mean, that's
too many other things to do.
Yeah, they do like reading. Actually,
that's good.
Anyway, that's what I do.
I think it's really exciting. the kind of automated future. I think it's really exciting. I love sci-fi. And it's a great way of getting your kids to sort of open their minds about sort of future possibilities and time travel.
Yeah,
I hate it.
I
don't like sci-fi.
Machines become cleverer than humans. You've got to start worrying.
No, it's frightening. Yeah. Anyway, let us know your thoughts on that. We've got to wrap the papers because we had so much fun arguing about the building of roads or not. Emily Carbon Norman Baker will welcome you back for more of the same just after 8:30.
Well, it is now coming up to 7:49, and let's bring you up to date with today's top stories.
Prince Harry has said he wants his father and brother back in an interview to be televised days before his memoir is released. ITV say the interview with the Duke of Sussex will go into unprecedented depth and detail about his life in and outside the royal family.
And low-income households will receive £900 cash support this spring to help with the cost of living crisis. 8 million people will be eligible, including those on universal credit, pension credits and tax credits. The government says the money will go directly to bank accounts in 3 separate payments.
New data shows the number of children needing help for serious mental health problems rose by nearly 40% last year. The NHS says they received more than 1 million referrals in England. They involve children who are suicidal, self-harming and suffering serious depression or anxiety. Got to get rid of the smartphones. You've got to get rid of social media. Youngsters are just,
I agree,
it's just
but
awful. I'm with Kate Winslet on this all the way.
My kids hardly ever use their phones, and they've got them. They're just not bothered. They just do ordinary things.
Hang on, how old? Your youngest is 7.
My girl is 8, my boy's 13.
She's got a phone at 8?
No, she uses them, mums.
Oh, right, all right.
But my boy's got a phone, 13, barely ever uses it, just not interested.
Good.
It's really, really happy.
Yeah, well, long may that continue. Look, we've been talking today. It is National Divorce Day, and with the ongoing cost of living crisis, stress from the festive season and the introduction of the new no-fault divorce law, UK solicitors are bracing for a surge in separations this January.
New data also shows that the number of couples filing for divorce in 2022 doubled from the previous year.
Well, the divorce coach, Sarah Davidson, joins us to discuss. I mean, that's significant, a doubling.
Yes.
It's sad, isn't it?
It's really sad, but I think we've got to remember that January is always boom time for divorce anyway. So after the festive season, it does put extra pressure on relationships. And then you've got to couple that with the cost of living crisis right now. And you know, that is something, financial issues do really cause big problems in relationships, especially if one of you's like a shrewd saver and the other one's a spender. You can imagine that puts extra pressure and a lot of conflict.
That's interesting because during the lockdown, I remember covering the fact then that divorces were going through an all-time low. And people were going, wow, it's amazing. People are spending more time together, they're getting on. In actual fact, we were just seeing a bit of a lag, weren't we? And now, again, with these new laws coming in about no-fault divorce, they're all piling in to sort of separate, aren't they?
Yes, I mean, no-fault divorce is a great thing. You know, it really has helped dial down the tension around divorce because we're not allocating blame anymore. So I think it really does help. It really does help with people, you know, who do need to get divorced. But I think a lot of people waited for no-fault divorce because it is a more amicable way to do things. It's probably a bit faster as well because it's 6 months you'll be through the system. So I think no-fault divorce has brought a lot of benefits to people if the relationship is breaking down.
Michelle Obama was interviewed over the Christmas period and she talked about how she hated Barack for 10 years. And she talked about how it was a period in their marriage, they've been married 30 years now, where both their children were small, both of them were trying to forge their careers and there was so much pressure on them. Children are irrational, they're needy, they're exhausting, and yet they're just children. So you can't turn your anger onto them. She said you just naturally turn your ire onto your partner. Is there a danger that when the going gets tough, we're all just taking the opportunity to bail out as soon as we can? Because Michelle's argument was she's so glad she stuck it out because she's remembered all the reasons she loves her husband and she's so pleased they still have that family unit. And I'm just questioning why my mum sent that article to me over the Christmas period.
What's she trying to tell you?
But, you know, it's old-fashioned view, really, that sticking with it is the right thing to do. But, you know, is there some merit in that argument?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the most important thing is to make sure that you don't leave with any regret. So working on your marriage before you make any big decisions is important. And I think, you know, that there's so much when we take so much time getting into a marriage, we need to take that amount of time before we leave a marriage.
Are there stats about how many people do regret divorce? Do we know how many people have buyer's remorse, as it were?
Well, you know, I think we're adults, so we've got to be able to make our own decisions. You know, I think nobody sort of vets us whether we're making the right decision to get married, do they? So why should we be held to account when we decide to leave? So I think, you know, there are some real positives from this that are coming out of it.
But it's also fair to say, back in the day, you know, couples stayed together for the sake of it. It was tradition. It was the societal norm. But, you know, people who are thinking about separating shouldn't feel terrible about it if oftentimes, of course, you go on to have happier lives and still be involved. Like my mum and dad, they divorced, they married when they were very young, and they're best friends now. In their 70s and 80s, they go out for Sunday lunch every week. And in actual fact, they said that separating was a good thing for them and a good thing, in a sense, for us as the kids. Because if you're in a house where there's confrontation, that's not a good thing either, is it?
No, and that's, you've got to look at, is it a healthy relationship? A lot of people say to me, Sarah, we're staying together for the kids, but what is the message kids are learning about what love is, what a relationship is? So I think we've really got to look at, is this healthy and are you happy? And if you can save it, great. There's a lot of things we can do to improve communication, look at how we handle stress. If there are issues right now with the cost of living, address them. Don't let them fester. Communicate better so that you can actually work through some of these issues.
We did a marriage course before we got married. It was mandatory as part of the church. It was a Catholic wedding. We had to go along for like a 2-hour session with a bunch of other couples. I mean, it was all quite cringy, but it was also quite sweet. And they taught us this mechanism where you had to give each other a pen to allow the other person to make sure they didn't interrupt. So I'd be saying my piece, and then the other person would hold their pen and say their piece, and it would stop you interrupting.
You've forgotten. It's meant to be my turn.
Sorry. But we always laugh because actually both of us interrupt each other and never let the other one finish their point. And it's quite a good little trick. Do you think there's not enough sort of advice for couples going into marriage about what it takes? Because it's not easy to stay married to someone for a long time.
It's really not, and it does take work. And I think no fault divorces actually spark people wanting to work better on their relationships and harder to improve them because they know it could be a little bit easier to get out. So I do think that looking at your communication styles, how you resolve conflict, all these things are really important to improve the success chances of your relationship.
That's superb. Well, on a bleak day, thank you for coming in and cheering us up. Sarah
Thanks very much for having me.
Well done for withstanding the fan blowing your papers off the desk and you're constantly. It was rather entertaining.
It's the creative furnace in here. We need to be cooled down. Anyway,
we're going to take a break. Let us know your thoughts on that story that we just covered. Are you going for a quickie divorce this year? Or are you going to try and salvage your marriage? We'll be back in just a few minutes. See you in a sec.
This year on GB News, we've got brand new members in the family.
Join us. Across the entire United Kingdom, we cover the issues that matter to you. GB News will always stay honest, balanced and fair. We want to hear whatever is on your mind.
And we don't talk down to you.
The establishment had their chance.
Now we're here to represent you. Britain's watching.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Camilla Tominey. Join me on GB News on Sunday mornings for a politics show with personality on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamonn Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and tune-in apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Deebs & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
Join me, Lawrence Fox, on GB News. Frank, fun, fearless and sometimes serious. Much as I love a Friday night punch-up, what I really want is a battle of ideas. I want to look at things differently. I want to hear different voices and engage with your unique experiences. Every Friday at 7 p.m. on GB News.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes & Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events And I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debate, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes & Co.
I'm Mark Dolan. Join me at 11 on GB News for Headliners, in which I'll be joined by two of the UK's top comedians discussing tomorrow's papers. If it's an important story, we'll cover it, but we'll have some fun along the way. Headliners, the late night paper review that won't send you to sleep like the others will. 7 nights a week at 11 p.m. on GB News.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
The worst week of rail disruption in 30 years begins today as commuters try to return to work.
Top of the morning and Happy New Year. It's 8 o'clock on Tuesday, the 3rd of January. This is Breakfast on GB News with Isabel, Webster and myself, Martin Dorby. And here's what's leading the news this morning.
40,000 members of the RMT union begin their first two-day walkout of the week today as commuters return to the office, sparking fears people will give up on train travel for good. The Transport Secretary, Mark Harper, told GB News that the unions were continuing to resist government negotiations.
People want to see is to get these disputes sorted out, and on the rail network is to get the rail network back up and running again, and that's what we've been trying to do.
As though it's better to keep us somehow as the villains. They've shown absolutely no willingness to reconcile.
As you saw there, Prince Harry has said he'd like his father and his brother back in a trailer for a new interview airing this Sunday. The revelations come as the Duke of Sussex prepares to release his memoirs Spare this time next week.
And the British Medical Association has warned that pressure on the NHS is intolerable and unsustainable. Ministers are being urged to take immediate action after a number of hospital trusts across the country have declared critical incidents.
And as ever, please get in touch all the usual ways via Twitter or email gbviews@gbnews. Let us know what you're watching and what you're listening to, and let us know where you are so we can give you a nice shout out.
So our top story this morning, 5 days of rail strikes begin with 40,000 members of the RMT union walking out as commuters return to work after the Christmas holidays.
The RMT strike will last until midnight tomorrow before yet another 48-hour walkout begins on Friday. ASLEF train drivers will also strike this Thursday, which will continue to significantly impact all rail services.
Well, Network Rail have said the combination of strikes will result in only about 20% of services running across the entire country this week. The Transport Secretary, Mark Harper, told GB News that the government was trying to solve the dispute.
We're working very hard to facilitate getting these strikes sorted out. For example, I made sure that an offer was put to rail unions. Two of the unions accepted that deal on Network Rail. The RMT, about a third of their members did vote for it, even though they were instructed not to, but they're still not willing to settle what is a very fair and reasonable offer. So look, government's going to continue to work really hard to try and help bring the two sides together to get this resolved. I know how frustrating this is for commuters, and the danger is it puts people off using the railways, which is a bit of self-harm on the part of the rail unions that haven't settled this dispute.
And now for the latest on the nationwide situation is the legendary travel correspondent Simon Kohler, who's just legged it to the studio from Euston. So, Simon, it's got to be said, these talks, they seem to be moving about as slowly as the abandoned trains. Is there any end in sight?
Let me tell you exactly where we are, Martin. So, the unions are desperate to talk. They really are. I've been talking to some senior officials and they just want to get a settlement. Just remember, if you're working for Network Rail and you're a member of the RMT, then by the end of this week, it would have been 20 strike days in 200 since midsummer last year that you've been on strike. And that is a heck of a lot of pay to lose, never mind the damage that it does to the railway as a whole. The union says that it is Mark Harper and other ministers who are blocking a settlement by making it impossible for the employers, that's the rail delivery group representing train operators and Network Rail, to do what they would normally do, which is just kind of, OK, right, 5% plus 4% isn't enough, let's make it 6 plus 5 and let's see if we can find a landing zone. They believe that the modernisation, which the government says is absolutely crucial, bear in mind this is an industry that has lost 20% of its customers and 29% of its revenue since COVID, which for any business would be really quite catastrophic. The government says you've got to change, and you've got to change now. The union says that they're trying to rush things through. They want to get things back. Of course, caught in the middle of all this, the long-suffering passenger who may well just be thinking, thank you, I've had enough.
Yeah, and we'll get more on the unions in a moment. Mick Lynch has been speaking to our reporter, Paul Hawkins, at Euston, where you've just been. But in terms of the suggestion that this could be, devastating for the rail lines, do you buy that? Do you think it will put people off?
Every single day that people can't get to work, they can't get to see loved ones, they can't get to hospital appointments, is a day when they're going to be thinking, actually, I've got to find an alternative. And it might be that reluctantly they decide to buy a car. And once they've done that, they're not coming back to the railways. The rail industry already has a huge task ahead to try to encourage people back onto the trains to make it a vaguely sustainable business, because at the moment it's just the poor old taxpayer, many of whom never go near a train, who are having to pay out on this. And if you're starting to lose passengers, then it goes into a horrible spiral that we've seen before. Fewer passengers means fewer services, fewer passengers, and the whole thing goes very, very badly wrong.
I wonder, Simon, if one of the kind of unintended consequences of all of this is this long-fought ideological war on the car, on the motorists, to try and drive us onto public transport. Suddenly, in quite a short period, that's all been undone.
Oh, sure, yeah. No, the government talks about net zero and how important the railways are for part of this, but right now they are engaged in an ideological battle. It appears that they believe that they can win in the same way that Thatcher prevailed over the miners in the 1980s. An awful lot of people would say, actually, this isn't quite the same, and it's perhaps not going to unfold in the same way.
Trains could be a really great alternative to cars, though. I mean, you travel by train a huge amount, certainly on the continent. What's your experience there? I mean, they famously travel on time, they're rapid, more affordable. Are they better than... Is it a very British
They're
problem?
very different. The UK does trains very, very differently. Actually, when things are working, we've got fantastic trains.
Well, that's the
with
caveat
great
of all caveats,
men and women.
isn't it?
They might be next Monday, you never know.
Right.
No, we've got great men and women running a fantastic service, which if you, like me, have got more time on your hands than you should have, then you can find some great fares, but you're having to do things like, so at the weekend I went to Bath. Obviously, I'm not going to buy a ticket from London to Bath, because that would be mad, because I'm going to save half price by buying a ticket to Didcot and another one from there. I don't make up the rules for the fares, I just exploit them legally.
I wonder, Simon, if part of the ideological goal of the unions is what we see a lot on the continent, actually, and that is bringing the trains back into state ownership. Isn't that their true goal?
That's what they're saying, but in fact they've actually been renationalised. The only argument, and I've been having a bit of an argument, it'd be interesting to see if it comes up with your interview in a moment with Mick Lynch about this, effectively, they still say that it's shareholders who are taking hundreds of millions of pounds out of the industry. In fact, the trains are outsourced to about 20 private companies. Some of them are run by the state pretty well. There's a reasonable argument on both grounds, but it's not. It's absolutely not a privatised, franchised industry. This is effectively nationalised.
OK, Simon called it for your take. We appreciate it. Thank you very much indeed. Let's cross back to Euston. Paul Hawkins standing by for us there. Paul, we had the Transport Secretary on a little bit earlier with his version of things. What's Mick Lynch been saying to you this morning?
Yeah, well, in the last few minutes I spoke to Mick Lynch, the General Secretary of the RMT, and I asked him really, how close this is to a resolution and how long his members are willing to go on striking for. This is what he has to tell me.
Well, we want a resolution. We're ready and able to discuss with the companies and the government whenever they want to put that on. We're hearing that the Transport Secretary is saying that he's keen to convene talks. And if there's an invite, we'll be there today, tomorrow, or whenever it is that they want to get there. But there has to be a change. We've been hearing the same stuff for 6 months or more, that they want to facilitate a settlement. Well, they've got to prove that now. They've got to change the equation that's being put to us in those talks. And we will look forward to that if that comes true.
So he is willing to meet, and I'm hearing that the Transport Secretary, Mark Harper, is willing to meet as well. So it appears they can get around the table. But the red lines, one of the big red lines for the unions is reform. And the government is insisting that it moves towards driver-only trains. That is, you take away the guard from the train, and the unions are saying, no, look, you've thrown this in at the last minute, you threw that in December as a condition. We will never agree to that. So there is still some distance between the two sides when it comes to reform. Pay, you'd say, perhaps that is negotiable. They can haggle over that sort of thing. But the red lines for the train operator, for the unions, I should say, are reform on things like closure of ticket offices and also driver-only trains.
Paul Hawkins, thank you for your analysis and well done for grabbing Mick there. We weren't sure if we were going to get him, but that's fabulous. Thank you very much indeed.
Superb. Well, medics are warning that the NHS is on a knife edge once again as critical incidents are declared in hospital trusts across the country.
Follows a warning from the country's top A&E doctor that delays in the NHS could be the worst on record.
Transport Secretary Mark Harper told us earlier on GB News that the government was listening to the recommendation of fears of the NHS trusts.
Value the people that work in the health service. That's why we have independent pay review bodies that take evidence not just from ministers but also from health unions. All of the health unions and the professional bodies give evidence, and those pay review bodies this last year recommended higher actually than the government had set out in its submission to those pay review bodies, but the government accepted all of those recommendations in full, and that's the pay offer that's been made to unions. And obviously the process for this coming year's starting, and the government will listen very carefully to that. But we accepted all of the recommendations of the independent pay review bodies. I think that's the right way to set pay in the health service, and that's what we continue to do.
Well, our national reporter Theo Chikomba joins us from West Hertfordshire Ambulance Station Hemel Hempstead now. What's the latest over there?
Yes, good morning. We are here at the East of England Ambulance Service, where for the second time in a number of weeks they have announced a business continuity critical incident. And what this means is that they want to ensure their resources are focused on patients with the greatest need, as well as allowing access to their wider support network from health and care providers. Now, this comes at a time where we've heard from health bosses or those who work in the industry about some of the challenges they are facing. We've indeed heard from the British Medical Association, who are saying the government's political choices are leading to patients dying unnecessarily. Now, one of the professors who's the chair for the association, he was saying the current situation in the NHS is intolerable and unsustainable for both the patients and of course the hard-working staff. In response, the government from the Department of Health and Social Care are saying the NHS, we understand they do an incredible job and we understand some of the challenges they're going through at the moment following the pandemic, and they're saying they have backed the industry with £14.1 billion over the next 2 years, but also £500 million to spend up on hospital discharge and free up beds. Of course, that money, we have heard already before, but of course the challenges we're hearing every single day now, particularly over the last few weeks, as they've been facing pressures during winter, and they're saying it's something we haven't seen since before the pandemic. So yeah, difficult and challenging times for those who work in the NHS at the moment.
Well, and for patients as well, one presumes. Theo Chicumba, thank you very much indeed for that. Let's get some analysis from our political reporter, Olivia Utley. Very good morning to you, Olivia. Look, you heard the clip there from a Secretary of State talking about the crisis, talking about the investment that they've put recently and announced recently in the health service, and talking about how they agree what NHS staff are paid. But it's clearly not working given the unfolding crisis.
Yeah, and this has become a really burning issue for Rishi Sunak. Once we get through this current wave of strikes, the state of the NHS is going to become front and foremost in almost everyone's minds. At the moment, we've got this problem, of course, of the twin strike of the flu and the COVID outbreak at the same time. And not only is that putting pressure on hospitals in terms of patients, but you've also got high level of staff absences like we saw during the pandemic. And we know that the NHS is pretty well funded now. There's been investment after investment over the past few years. We've got more nurses, more junior doctors than there were pre-pandemic. And so the government is holding to this line that, you know, we are now as well funded as most of our European counterparts, etc. But the sticking point is that our outcomes are much worse than many of our European counterparts. So we get to the question again of reform. Is the government in a strong enough position to carry through any meaningful reform? It's very hard to say. We've got that story in the papers this morning that Rishi Sunak's considering shelving or at least pushing back his deadline to get Brexit legislation, to get EU legislation removed from the statute book by the end of 2023. That shows what a weak position the Prime Minister is in. And if no government before him has managed to get through serious reform to the NHS, will it be possible for him to do it?
And there's another strike due next Wednesday of ambulance workers by Unison and the GMB walking out in England and Wales. Front centre, wherever he turns, Rishi has got to deal with a crisis. But we keep saying on this show, and our viewers keep telling us they would love Rishi to get tough and actually get on with resolving this, because, you know, we've been trying to play matchmaker today. We've had Mick Lynch saying he wants to talk to Mark Harper. We've had Mark Harper saying he'd like to talk to them, but they're not sitting down and getting this done. Is there any way out of this, or are we just going to have to get used to strikes like we used to COVID?
Well, it sounds as though what the government was hoping is that it could bring in this new anti-strike legislation, essentially, legislation that would ensure minimum service would be provided during strikes, which would essentially mean far fewer people could strike. That has been shelved. It's not quite clear why. Backbenchers are getting more and more pushy about this. They really want to see it brought forward in the new year, which was promised, but we haven't had any timetable about that. That is potentially because we're hearing now that the courts and the Lords could well just block it. So Rishi Sunak's wondering what he can do with that. If he can't do that, the Sun is now reporting this morning that he would consider bringing in pension increases and bonuses and longer holiday for strikers in both the NHS and in the rail industry, which would be some sort of compromise at least. But the hope is that he can get through, in the government's eyes, the hope is that he can get through this strike curtailing legislation. Whether he can do that with a pretty Remainer, with a pretty left-wing House of Lords is another question.
And there's a timeline. It won't be at least 6 months before anything like that can even be voted upon. And I think you're right. I think it will get voted down. It has become so politicised now, these strikes. I think Rishi is really between a rock and a hard place.
He definitely is. And I think the issue is that you've got these two strikes going on at the same time. You've got the NHS strikes and the rail strikes. The government is calculating that public support for the rail strikers is going to start ebbing away. We saw that a bit in what Mark Harper was saying there. Yeah. Piece in the Times that suggesting that people are going, from the government, suggesting that people are going to just stop using the railways altogether. And that's what the government's hoping for, and it does seem to be coming true.
Can't do that with hospitals, though, can you?
But with hospitals, no. And public support for the nurses is still sky high. So battling these two different fronts at the same time, and although he might be making progress on one, the other is still not looking
and
promising.
funnily enough, the hard line seems to be coming more from Steve Barclay than perhaps Mark Harper, in the sense that Steve Barclay won't even discuss pay, where it sounds as though there are more olive branches being offered to the more publicly the less supported rail unions than perhaps the more publicly supported nursing unions. Anyway, all very interesting. Olivia Utley, thank you for your take this morning. With the time at 8:17, we're going to bring you up to date with the rest of this morning's top stories.
Two British citizens were among 4 people that were killed in a helicopter crash in Australia yesterday. The couple, a 57-year-old woman and a 65-year-old man, were on the holiday in the country when the accident happened. 3 others were also left critically injured.
A record number of cancer patients were treated last year. NHS figures show more than 320,000 people received cancer care in the 12 months from November 2021.
Brazilian footballing legend Pelé is due to be buried today. Thousands of fans have gathered to pay respects to his coffin placed at the grounds of his former club Santos. Pelé lost his battle with cancer last Thursday. The 3 times World Cup winner was 82.
Of views coming in this morning, thick and fast. What have you got there?
An interesting one on Christmas trees, the topic of the day.
Yes, because ours has vanished. I was in yesterday, our tree has gone.
Mine is still up and it should stay up, I think, until the 12 days of Christmas expires, which is midnight Wednesday.
Such a traditionalist. You know, he put bacon on his turkey in the shape of a Union Jack.
A Union flag, a Brexit based is what I call that.
And the tree up resolutely until I have to say my tree came down yesterday, but only because I just needed to have a bit of a clean up. What are our viewers saying?
Now then, Linda from South Wales, hello South Wales, completely agrees with you, Isabel.
There you go.
I took my tree and decorations down on Boxing Day.
That's a bit early for me, though.
A bit harsh.
Boxing Day. Yeah.
I've been working full time, so I have to try and get organised as soon as possible.
Yeah, well, that's true. I can understand that. Linda, thank you for getting in touch. Lots of you getting in touch on the strikes. Paul saying British train drivers are the highest paid in Europe. Bite the bullet and replace them.
Yeah.
Keith says, now that more people are dying... Oh, this is on the NHS strike, sorry. Yeah. Now that more people are dying because of understaffing in A&E than dying of COVID, should we close the COVID vaccination centres and redeploy staff into hospitals?
And Rick says, if rail strikers want inflation-busting pay rises, then why don't these companies halt their free travel and include weekends as normal parts of a working week like all other companies do? Again, people are losing patience with the rails unions out there.
And on Prince Harry, Phil says the real question is, do Charles and William want Harry back?
Yeah, fair point.
Keep those thoughts coming in thick and fast. We're going to take a break. After that, we'll be talking some more about Prince Harry.
I'll get away from him.
Yeah, he's going to be speaking out ahead of that release of his book Spare, which comes out a week today.
Oh, great.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Deebs & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
Why not take us home with you by visiting the GB News shop at gbnews.store. You'll find all the official merchandise, a really good present actually for yourself, your friends or your family.
We ship across the UK mainland at no extra cost. GB News, the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me! And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. B, I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Welcome back. It's 8:24. Still to come on the programme this morning.
At 8:45, we'll speak to a former apprentice contestant as a new group of hopefuls prepare to enter Lord Sugar's boardroom.
And do you live in one of the country's speeding capitals? We'll find out who the worst offenders are. You might be surprised at 9:15.
Yep. You can join in any of our discussions, as usual, by emailing gbviews@gbnews, or you can tweet us at gbnews. Please get involved. And the Duke of Sussex has claimed that he wants to reconcile with the King and the Prince of Wales in a trailer for a new interview to be broadcast this Sunday.
It comes ahead of the release of his much-anticipated memoir, Spare, published a week today. Here's what we can expect.
It needed to be this way. The leaking and the planting. I want a family, not an institution. They feel as though it's better to keep us somehow as the villains. They've shown absolutely no willingness to reconcile. I would like to get my father back. I would like to have my brother back.
Well, let's speak to the royal broadcaster and historian Rafe Hadel-Mancu. Look, one can't help but feel if that's what he really wants, genuinely, then he should stop washing his dirty laundry in public, even if he does have legitimate grievances.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Couldn't agree more. I mean, speaking personally, I feel as if, we've gone straight from New Year's Day to Groundhog Day with yet another one of these airing of dirty laundry, as you say. I mean, look, the royal family have done all that they can. 3 olive branches have been extended now. As soon as the king ascended the throne, he gave a wonderfully warm speech in which he mentioned Harry and Meghan lovingly and mentioned them building their lives overseas. Then we saw the Prince and Princess of Wales magnanimously inviting both Harry and Meghan to join them to view the flowers that had been laid for the Queen outside Windsor Castle after she died in September. And then, despite everything that they have done, despite Netflix, despite all the attacks, the King so generously reportedly invited them, and has still invited them, to their coronation. 3 olive branches, and we were all waiting to see what their response would be. We would have thought, the death of a much-loved member of the family would provide the great occasion for this reconciliation and the accession of the king, a time to actually think about what your priorities are. But instead we had this, as I've said yesterday to somebody, this nuclear strike by the Sussexes on the royal family with the Netflix documentary, and now this more targeted nuclear strike again on the Prince and Princess of Wales, if reports are to believe specifically, and perhaps also on Queen Camilla, which is a red line for the king. So certainly, if they want reconciliation, I don't know whether he went to a finishing school or a charm school, but how to win friends and influence people wasn't on their reading list, I would imagine.
OK, well, Rafe, for starters, Happy New Year to my friend. Great to see you again. 2 interviews coming up. The first one on ITV, Tom Bradby. Harry's known him for a long time, so I think he'll get an easy ride there. And then secondly, the Anderson Cooper exclusive stateside. We're expecting more of the kind of Oprah Winfrey, hand-wringing. They won't get grilled, will they? This will be a nice little soft ride for Harry.
That's right. So these 2 interviews have been agreed. These will probably be the only 2 television interviews. There'll be a newspaper interview as well. No serialization. But these, as you say, are with 2 very sympathetic interviewers. Tom Bradby from ITV, very respected. He's known the Duke since the 1990s. And of course, he was the one who released that documentary in 2019, which first broadcast information about Meghan's health concerns. So a very safe pair of hands there. Now, it's interesting. I haven't seen much coverage of this, but ITV was supposed to have produced the King's Christmas message last month. And for mysterious reasons, the palace axed ITV and gave the job over to the BBC, even though it was ITV's turn on this rota. It goes between Sky, BBC and ITV. No explanation was given as to why ITV lost the commission to produce the King's Christmas speech. Could it be because of this interview? We can only speculate, but it's an interesting little fact. And yes, and the second interview is with Anderson Cooper of CNN, but this is being done for CBS's flagship program, 60 Minutes. Again, a very safe pair of hands. He's very interested in mental health issues, having had a loss in his own family as well. And yes, you're going to get more of that Oprah Winfrey style of light touch interviewing over a cup of, ethically sourced chai or something. But also Anderson Cooper is no stranger to scandalous royal women. His great aunt had an affair with King Edward VIII, Prince Harry's great-great-uncle. And in fact, his great aunt introduced the future king to Wallis Simpson, an earlier centuries version of Meghan Markle, perhaps. So an interesting connection there. And the Anderson Cooper documentary has been filmed in a hotel ranch in California in a building called the Churchill Cottage, which the website says was used by Winston Churchill to write some of his tomes. A piece of fabricated history, so perhaps that's the appropriate place given the fabrications we've heard from Harry and Meghan recently.
Well, it's interesting because some of the things that he's been saying in those trailers that were released yesterday, where they were constantly leaking information about us. Well, what were they? The allegations that Meghan was a bully, that Kate had made to cry. Is he inadvertently validating those stories that were leaked, basically saying they were true?
Well, of course, all we've had with all of these allegations is a lot of fluff and hot air, but no specific incidents actually given. Show us the evidence. Where is the proof? And which stories, as you say, are you actually referring to? And it's also the selectivity here, the fact that, of course, nothing has ever been done by Harry and Meghan. In all of this, never once do they say, actually, we were wrong on this point, or we could have been warmer or nicer on another point. But I think that the key thing is, no mention was made of the fact that Buckingham Palace suppressed publication of the damaging report, allegedly, into Meghan's bullying of her staff. Now, you would have thought if the palace was actually campaigning against the Sussexes, they would have been the first to leak that report, but it was suppressed, and yet not one mention of that has been made, or one reference to it in their documentary or in these memoirs, apparently.
Thickens. Rafe Hadel-Mancu, I have a feeling we're going to be talking about this some more at some point, but for now, thank you very much indeed.
And after the break, we're going through the papers with Norman Baker and Emily Carver. Please come right back.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prisons? I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
My name's Tom Harwood, and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory.
twice baked. Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own news from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Welcome back. It's coming up to 8:35. Let's bring it up to date with this morning's front pages now.
Here's the Times. It's focusing on today's rail strikes. It says industrial action could turn a generation against rail travel.
The Mail focuses on Prince Harry's comments that he wants to get his father and his brother back.
The Mirror reports on the NHS crisis, saying its future is on a knife edge.
Bizarre story of the year already. The Daily Star says we should be eating our Christmas trees for a New Year health kick.
I love it.
I still don't understand that story.
I don't understand it. And somebody was saying that if you actually got the pine needles and added, what was it? Vinegar to it, it creates a natural anti-back after about 4 to 5 days. So you live and learn. Thank you to the Daily Star for that. We're joined again by the former Liberal Democrat Minister Norman Baker and the columnist at Conservative Home Emily Carver. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
I think it's worth reflecting that the front pages are such an interesting array of stories. You've got, I think, mainly the right-wing press focusing on strikes, I suppose. You've got some of the, the left-wing strikes talking about the NHS strikes. Yeah. Then you've got the Sun going after, and the Mail going after the royal family, obviously wanting, or a royal story, wanting something a bit different. It's quite an array of stories. Anyway, I've totally messed that link up.
No, you didn't. Meanwhile, the Daily Star says we should be eating our Christmas trees.
Yeah, exactly. It's a mixed bag, is the point.
Why don't you go there first? You're so desperate to do that story, Martin.
Yes, let's do that first.
Yeah, what is it?
Oh, well, this is actually very interesting.
Yeah.
This is the pine needles, yes? Well, there is a Michelin-starred chef who is in Copenhagen, and this is one of his delicacies. That he uses the pine needles to make different things. Think of it as a rosemary. You can use it in just about anything, he says. You can use it in ice cream, you can use it in gin, you can pickle it, you can use pine ash for charring sections. For charring meat, I guess. You can pretty much eat the whole thing.
Crikey.
Julia George Alice says, the author of How to Eat Your Christmas Tree.
I'm actually quite swayed by that. I did quite like the idea of a pine tree, you know, like based on some lamb or something.
I like pine
and
nuts.
Also, to keep it...
I'll have some pine nuts anytime.
To keep it British for you, Martin.
Yes.
John Williams, the executive chef of London's Michelin-starred Ritz restaurants, so the chef of the Ritz, says needles enhance the flavour of celeriac, among other ingredients. They're fragrant and spicy.
See, I've gone from ridiculing that to actually being quite...
You're changing before my eyes. I've got you on raspberry leaf tea this morning.
Tea.
Tomorrow you want a hard-boiled egg like me.
Your diet, yeah.
You're changing, Martin.
Fish down wind.
But presumably not eating the wood, though.
No.
Just the needles.
Like a beaver chewing away at the trunk.
Right, let's get serious, shall we? Norman, the Mail are talking about the slave trade. What's the story?
This is about a Tory MP, David Jones, who is objecting, I might say I tend to agree with him, that Parliament seems to be obsessed with identifying politicians from the past and works of art in the House of Commons linked to slavery. And I just I always wonder about whether the wisdom of going back and reinventing, morality from a different era and applying today's morality to a previous era. We all know the slave trade was wrong, but people in those days didn't think it was wrong. And to try and go back and change everything, it just seems to me to be...
country.
Well, we can't do that. I mean, morality changes, and people should be judged by whether they think something they're doing at the time is right or not. That's all that matters. Do they think it's right at the time? If it isn't, then fair enough.
Also, it's not exactly a gotcha moment, is it? I mean, we're endlessly talking about links to slave trade, and I think by now we all know that we were implicated in the slave trade.
And this is the sort of thing you'd normally expect from woke, snowflake students, but members of Parliament. Come on.
I think it's just an exercise in virtue signalling, and I also think it makes them feel a bit clever. Ooh, I found this link.
But there are genuine crises at the moment, multiple crises, that we should be really trying to come up with solutions to.
Yes.
And this is just looking back into the past.
It's pointless. Apparently, according to the Mail, the Speaker's state coach is said to have picked enslaved people. I have no idea how it does that.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think you're right. There is. You just nailed it. I mean, there are so many crises enveloping the country. They've got pretty busy in trays. You think they've got more to worry about than pictures hanging up in the House of Parliament.
Yeah.
Anyway, Emily, let's move on to a serious topic here. The children's mental health crisis. Who would have thought that locking children away for 2 years has increased their anxiety and stress during
Yes, this is a bit of a miserable one. Sorry, a bit of a depressing one. Excuse the pun. Yes, the number of under-18s who were referred for mental health treatment on the NHS rose 39% last year, presumably from the year before, which is an astonishing rise, really.
Then, can you?
Well, I don't know. It may be... It may be as a result. It may be actually now the cost of living struggles, worrying about whether their parents are going to make their ends meet. And it may be for many reasons. People say increasing social inequality, austerity, online harm. I don't know if those are the reasons. I know that online very much is an issue, but that's been an issue for a number of years now. So I'm not sure. It may be that there was a bit of a backlog in the number of children who were able to get counselling. Well, they got more severe, perhaps, the mental health problems.
The evidence is abundant. I think, it stands to common sense as well. If you kind of stop children integrating with each other in their formative years, stop them going to school, stop them socialising, it's going to have an impact. And I think, as across other areas of the health system, we're just seeing that backlog now effectively coming to market, aren't we, Norman?
I'm going to say, take a view from a previous generation, because I think I'm probably the oldest person on this table this morning. But, when I was young, you got chucked out of the house and go and play outside with other kids. That's what happened to you. You had to go and integrate with nature. You came back, with earth all over you and stuff like that, and that's how it was.
Norman, you're not allowed to say that anymore.
Why not?
That if you can just head out and be happy.
Well, that's how it was. And I think the online...
I agree with you.
The online thing, when kids are stuck in front of the computer screens for hours and hours on end, that's part of the problem.
Yeah,
definitely. And I think Kate Winslet has done a wonderful thing in speaking out and saying, guys, you can actually say no to your children. They don't have to have social media accounts. They don't have to have mobile phones. And I really do... Look, it's easy for me to say my eldest is only 7, but once he hits those ages where he's starting to nag, I want to try and form a pact with a group of parents of children at the same age and say amongst us, guys, should we just all turn around and say no to them together? Because it's hard to do it on your own, because there's that peer pressure. And you need the support of schools. You need the support of... there's an excellent children's commissioner at the moment who's arguing this case as well at the moment. But I think it does have to come to a point where you say, we know that the implications for this long-term are very serious for our youngsters. We have to take a stand.
But children need to understand what the word no means.
Yeah.
I say to my son, you know, you're allowed an hour to go online, play Minecraft, whatever, with your mates, and after that, that's the end of it, do something else. If you give kids boundaries, they respond to them.
They do.
Soft parenting, I think, is a part of it.
Yeah, boundaries are a very good thing.
Yeah. I'm going to be very strict.
When they're outside,
Yeah.
they can run and work.
I'm going to be very strict.
Well, I thought I would, but it turns out my children are fairly spirited, so it's quite tricky to make.
Actually, yeah, it's easy to say now.
Yeah. Right, let's talk about BBC cuts, Norman. The Guardian saying, do BBC bosses have any plans that aren't just cut?
Well, it's critical of what the BBC's doing, and you know, I'm critical of what the BBC's doing as well, which is why I agree with this article by and large. You know, we need the BBC. Whatever you think about the BBC, it's full of faults. But actually, we do need a properly funded public sector broadcaster in this country. And the trouble with the BBC is they're making these ridiculous cuts. They've got far too many managers, I think, who don't do anything. You've got cuts to local radio. Local radio is terribly important, and it doesn't cost very much, actually, in the big scheme of things. But it's all being cut to
the local radio. There are so many different local radio stations run by the BBC. What about giving, you know, private radio stations a chance to go at it? It's crowding them out. It's really hard for, you know, local radio to get up and running because the BBC just has a complete monopoly on it.
Commercial radio's never really been anything compared to BBC radio. Having learnt my trade in local radio, BBC radio, I have the utmost respect for it, and I think it is really sad. And we saw this with Liz Truss when she did a media round on local radio. Do you remember? And she got
They gave her what?
Yes, she did. Yeah.
And it really demonstrated the depth of talent and also the importance of being tapped in with local communities. Something we obviously do at GB News, which is different.
No, but there's no reason why that should only be the BBC who does that.
But they currently already do it. So why dismantle it when they're doing?
I don't think we should dismantle it necessarily. I was just pointing out that it does crowd out potential, you know, upstarters, startups.
The trouble is, local radio is not BBC. It tends to be lowest common denominator because it saves money. News is expensive on local radio, and you know, stations like Heart, you know, it says more variety on Heart. It's the same stuff all day. You don't have news on those programmes. And the BBC now, local radio, Radio Sussex joins up with Radio Surrey in the evening. You know, it's not a local station. Surrey and Sussex is not a local station.
Putting it back to print media, my old background, print media, I think the BBC local online coverage decimated the local newspaper industry, and that was bankrolled by the taxpayer, and it did kill the grassroots newspapers in this country, which I think is a terrible thing. Anyway, just my little bit there.
No, there's pros and cons. There's pros and cons.
Print.
I don't know. I like the idea of small businesses being able to compete, and I think the BBC is. Well, it's a monopoly, really, for the local areas in terms of the
Emily,
radio.
I like the competition
I'm not sure that's
too.
fair.
I like the competition too, but they don't arise, they don't start, they don't do anything.
That's because it's so dominated by the BBC.
I don't think it is.
If you look at podcasts, for example, in this country, totally dominated by the BBC, who have huge amounts of resources to be able to pump into all of these podcasts with all these celebrities, etc., etc. I don't know.
It's because it's
worth thinking
news is loss-making, and it has to have either somebody with hugely deep pockets, or it has to be funded in a fairly unique way. But it's never going to be a commercial enterprise news, and I think that's why it's a problem in local radio.
Yeah, but Martin, I totally agree with you about local papers because, you know, when I was first a councillor many years ago, we had at council meetings with 3 local newspapers turning up at the council meeting and the BBC local radio turning up as well to report on what was happening, and he turned up to courts as well to report on court cases. Now they're nowhere. All this goes by default. People don't report these things anymore.
Yeah, they've been forced out the market by a taxpayer-funded model, and all of those local newspaper journalists came to be national newspaper journalists, and that was the kind of that was the
training
nursery
ground.
The nursery pool for an entire industry, which I think was wiped out by the BBC and the taxpayer. Not been anti-BBC, saying that was the business model.
When I worked in local BBC radio, we worked hand in hand with the local newspapers, and we would always be at the stories with them. And I have to say, my experience was not that we were wiping them out; that we worked quite well together. Anyway, it's just different experiences. It's a really interesting debate, but certainly the BBC is changing. That is for sure.
They could do with cutting Gary Lineker's pay. That would sort of
on that we can all agree.
Yeah.
On that we can all agree.
Flexible working, Emily, in the Telegraph. Make firms justify not allowing flexible working, says Tory MP.
But this is very interesting. This is Caroline Noakes, who has come under criticism for some of her views on feminist or gender issues. For example, I believe she said, you know, trans women are women, that sort of thing, that men can self-identify. She also wrote a letter to the Sun's editor about Jeremy Clarkson's column, which I personally thought was inappropriate, an attack on the free press. But now she's getting involved in flexible working and suggesting a policy that was a Labour policy, which is that firms should have to justify not allowing flexible working when you apply for a job. And it sounds nice. OK, great, flexible working, companies should do that, etc., etc. But it's piling on more regulation. It would be piling on more regulation onto businesses when they're already struggling, particularly smaller businesses. And no one's forcing you to take a job at a company, fundamentally. Like, you can shop around when it comes to having a job. And so I don't know why the impetus should be on the companies by matter of law and regulation.
And interesting as well how, you know, Jacob Rees-Mogg, for example, is cracking the whip to get people back to work in the civil service. I think only about half of the people back at the Ministry of Defence, and yet here we are, the opposite.
I just think it's one of those policies that sounds nice. Flexible working, let's make the companies do flexible working. But actually, in practice, it's not very practical, really.
It sounds like you've renamed Caroline Wokes, is that right?
Nice.
Very good, Norman.
We were told we're out of time, but I really want to squeeze the story in really quickly, Norman. The Sun, page 23, Supermarket Street. What's going on?
This is a woman who's sought to... who's got the Asda logo on her head, which is very unfortunate, I think. And this
She's
is because
she's dyeing her hair.
she was
with
dyeing her hair with a
bag.
plastic bag, and now she's an advert for Asda.
Oh, we can.
Which is very sad.
We can get that shot. Sorry, this is all a bit of a disaster. It doesn't have the picture. She's
So-
holding it up.
where's the
gallery.
Oh, no, we don't have the picture.
So that's the dye
You got to see the
transfer.
picture.
There we go.
Yeah.
Anyway, it was a good idea.
Asda price.
Norma Baker, Emily Carver,
Thank
you both very much indeed.
OK, let's bring you up to date with all of the morning's top stories now, and it is 8:48.
Passengers are facing fresh rail strike action from today as tens of thousands of workers walk off the job in a dispute over pay, job and conditions. Members of the RMT union at Network Rail and 14 trail operators will stage 2 48-hour walkouts from today and Friday, while drivers in the ASLEV union will strike on Thursday.
Prince Harry has said he wants his father and brother back in an interview to be televised days before his memoir is released. ITV say the interview with the Duke of Sussex will go into unprecedented depth and detail about his life outside the royal family.
Low-income households will receive £900 cash support this spring to help with the cost of living crisis. 8 million people will be eligible, including those on universal credit, pension credit and tax credits. The government says the cash will go directly to bank accounts in 3 separate payments.
Joined by a legend to my side here, because Lord Alan Sugar's search for a new apprentice is about to begin as the hit BBC reality series returns to screens this Thursday.
Well, the popular series, which began in 2005, will see 16 candidates go head-to-head in a bid to win a £250,000 business investment. But before we meet the candidate that you've been trailing there, here's a taste of this year's series.
This is not a game. This remains the toughest job interview. It's an opportunity of a lifetime. The world's now open for business. I'm kicking things off with the ultimate task. One of you will be gone before your postcards get back. Let's get down to business.
And we can speak to Thomas Skinner, who appeared on Series 15 of the show in 2019 and was fired by Lord Sugar in week 9. Very good morning to you. Those 9 weeks, what was it like?
Best thing I ever done, honestly. I absolutely loved it. It was just a mad experience, you know. You get thrown into an house with all 16 other people you don't know, you never met them before. They take your phone off you can't read the paper, you can't watch telly, and you don't know what's going to happen. You wake up before him and they say, right, today you're going to be making isoles. You need to go. It was just mental, like, it was madness, but I really enjoyed it, One
of the things I've noticed about the feedback about you online is you are very much a sort of lovable rogue. The public really took to you. Because you sort of break the mould, didn't you? I mean, a lot of them are like very kind of straight out of university, very kind of... whereas you're just like a geezer. Like a sort of barrow boy, that sort of thing. How did your different personality rub up against the other contestants?
Do you know what? It was like, look, because you're put in a circle that I wouldn't normally mix with. Do you know what I mean? So everyone I met on there, like, not saying they was lovely people, but they're not sort of people that I'd mix with every day. And I got to learn loads from them. They was good people, and we had a laugh. And listen, it was just a blinder.
What does it take to be not only a successful candidate, but just to be a candidate on the show? I mean, do you think always the best people win?
No, do you know what? Like, you got to remember, it is TV as well, so they do set you up a little bit, you know. Like when I was on there, obviously there was times when you were saying something, I'd set out straight away, and they'd go, right, Tom, we've got to do that again. You know what I mean? So there is certain things that they do to make it obviously watchable, make it fun, but it is a proper game. Like it is a proper process, and if you don't do well, you are going to get kicked out. I mean, I never won a task. I lost every single week, you know what I mean?
Yeah, but one thing that you spoke out about, which I've noticed when you look at it, actually, it's starting to look more and more like Towie. Now, the contestants don't look like they're in Love Island. There seems to be much
getting glammed up,
much more glammed up. And you spoke out, didn't you, about the fact you were made to line up in order of how hot you were.
Yeah. So what happens is when you're doing your interviews, let's say, like, they give you all these mad tasks to do. So like you're in a room with all the potential people who are going to go on the show, and one of the things they make you do is, right, listen, guys, there's 20 of you. What all can you line up from the best looking to the ugliest? That's like one of the things
Where did you go in the line?
I went straight down the bottom. You know what I mean?
That's not fair. OK, so what are you going to be looking out for in this series? I mean, will you be watching it with a bit of PTSD, thinking, thank God I'm not doing that?
No, do you know what? I'd do it again.
Would you?
I honestly,
did it change your life?
Changed my life. Like, I've gone from having a few market stalls to having a nationwide business, you know? Like, it really helped me, and I've got like hundreds of thousands of followers on social media now. Yeah. Like even when I have my breakfast in the cafe every morning, like it gets like 1 million views. It's mental, you know what I mean? All for the back of that show.
Yeah. And what is your business?
So I sell beds. I manufacture beds and mattresses. I've got market stalls. I've got my own boxing gym, Bosch Gym. I'm actually fighting on the 4th of March, so I've got to start at the cafe and lose a bit of derby.
Gosh, what are you doing then?
What's that?
What's the fight?
I'm boxing on the 4th of March. At the Circus Tavern in Essex.
So. Is that a charity job or is it a grudge match?
Yeah, just a charity fight. It'd be good fun.
And do you think it actually leads to people becoming, business players, or is it just a route to becoming a celeb?
No, I do think, look, like, it increased me business-wise massively. I learnt loads on the show. Like, I still stay in touch with Lord Sugar as well, which is nice. I still stay in touch with all the candidates. But I met nice people, like even from the cameramen, the sound crews, the producers. Like, I met nice people that I stayed in touch with, and it definitely helped me boost my business. Because even though I didn't win, like, I made a lot of money from it, you know?
All right, Tom, if any of the candidates are out there watching, what is your tips for success? How do you get to the top in The Apprentice?
Just keep working hard, stay lucky and keep positive, and that's it.
It's the best way to be. And Alan Sugar had a real soft spot for you, didn't he?
Yeah.
You still mates?
Yeah, still talk to him, yeah.
Is it the geezer vibe?
Yeah, I think
mate, do you know what? He's just a nice bloke. He ain't as scary as what he looks on the telly.
Love
Top
it.
man on the
Thomas
island, superb.
Skinner, thank you so much for coming
Thanks
in.
for having
Really
us.
appreciate it. And that series starts on Thursday. Will you be watching it?
Yeah, I really do like The Apprentice. Yeah, it's good. I think most of them are sort of, a little bit, the sort of people I love to hate. I put it, but that's kind of why I like watching car crash TV and cults.
Right, we're going to take a break. After that, we'll have more on the rail disruption across the country. See you in a moment.
This year on GB News, we've got brand new members in the family.
Join us. Across the entire United Kingdom, we cover the issues that matter to you. GB News will always stay honest, balanced and fair. We want to hear whatever is on your mind.
And we don't talk down to you.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you. Britain's watching.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Camilla Tominey. Join me on GB News on Sunday mornings for a politics show with personality on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamonn Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and tune-in apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Deebs & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
Join me, Lawrence Fox, on GB News. Frank, fun, fearless and sometimes serious. Much as I love a Friday night punch-up, what I really want is a battle of ideas. I want to look at things differently. I want to hear different voices and engage with your unique experiences. Every Friday at 7 p.m. on GB News.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes & Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes & Kerr.
I'm Mark Dolan. Join me at 11 on GB News for Headliners, in which I'll be joined by two of the UK's top comedians discussing tomorrow's papers. If it's an important story, we'll cover it, but we'll have some fun along the way. Headliners, the late night paper review that won't send you to sleep like the others will. 7 nights a week at 11 p.m. on GB News.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
The worst week of rail disruption in 30 years begins as commuters return to work.
Good morning, it's 9 o'clock on Tuesday the 3rd of January. This is Breakfast on GB News with Isabel, Webster and Martin Daubney. Here's what's leading the news this morning.
40,000 members of the RMT union begin their first two-day walkout of the week today as commuters return to the office, sparking fears people will give up on train travel for good. Earlier, the Transport Secretary Mark Harper told GB News that the unions were continuing to resist government negotiations.
People want to see is to get these disputes sorted out, and on the rail network is to get the rail network back up and running again, and that's what we've been trying to do.
As though it's better to keep us somehow as the villains. They've shown absolutely no willingness to reconcile.
Prince Harry has said he'd like his father and brother back in a trailer for a new interview airing this Sunday. The revelations come as the Duke of Sussex prepares to release his memoir, Spare, this time next week.
And the British Medical Association has warned that the pressure on the NHS is intolerable and unsustainable. Ministers are being urged to take immediate action after a number of hospital trusts across the country declared critical incidents.
And we would love to hear from you. You've got half an hour left of the show. So many views coming in this morning, from Prince Harry to Christmas decorations to rail strikes. Let us know your thoughts. gbviews@gbnews.uk, or you can tweet us at GBNews. And don't forget to tell us where you're watching or listening from.
So to our top story. 5 days of rail strikes begin today, with 40,000 members of the RMT walking out as commuters attempt to return to work after the Christmas holidays.
Yes, the RMT strike will last until midnight tomorrow before another 48-hour walkout begins on Friday. ASLEF train drivers will also strike this Thursday, which will continue to significantly impact services.
Network Rail have said that the combination of strikes will result in only about 20% of services running across the entire country this week. Transport Secretary Mark Harper told GB News earlier that the government was trying to quickly resolve the dispute.
We're working very hard to facilitate getting these strikes sorted out. For example, I made sure that an offer was put to rail unions. 2 of the unions accepted that deal on Network Rail. The RMT, about a third of their members did vote for it, even though they were instructed not to. But they're still not willing to settle what is a very fair and reasonable offer. So look, government's going to continue to work really hard to try and help bring the 2 sides together to get this resolved. I know how frustrating this is for commuters, and the danger is it puts people off using the railways, which is a bit of self-harm on the part of the rail unions that haven't settled this dispute.
And our reporter Paul Hawkins also spoke to RMT General Secretary Mick Lynch, who said he's open to talks.
Well, we want a resolution. We're ready and able to discuss with the companies and the government whenever they want to put that on. We're hearing that the Transport Secretary is saying that he's keen to convene talks. And if there's an invite, we'll be there today, tomorrow, or whenever it is that they want to get there. But there has to be a change. We've been hearing the same stuff for 6 months or more, that they want to facilitate a settlement. Well, they've got to prove that now. They've got to change the equation that's being put to us in those talks, and we will look forward to that if that comes true.
Well, let's speak to our Yorkshire and Humber reporter Anna Riley, who's at Leeds Station now for us. What's the picket line looking like where you are?
Good morning. It is a busy picket line. We've just come over here to get a little bit of shelter from the rain, but there is certainly a big turnout here in Leeds and a real feeling of determination amongst the workers. I'm joined this morning by Gaz Jackson. He is the RMT regional organiser for Yorkshire and Lincolnshire. Gaz, these strikes now rumbling on into the new year. How are you feeling? You know, what do you want to get out of this, and how long can it go on?
We want a resolution to this dispute. Our members are determined to make sure we can have a safe and accessible railway with their decent terms and conditions that they've fought for over the years, and that's the way we need to do it. The government needs to give the train operating companies and Network Rail the rope for us to do deals. 9 times out of 10 we do. It's the government that's stopping it.
And why don't you feel the most recent offer that's been put forward is good enough?
Because ultimately our members are into now the 4th year without a pay rise, and all the job security will give us 2 years worth of job security, and then everyone will be down the road. They want to close all the ticket offices and they want to remove guards off trains, and it's just not acceptable.
So it's not just about pay then?
Absolutely not about pay. You know, that would come second. We want job security, we want decent terms and conditions and a substantial pay rise for our membership.
How much more support can you get though? I mean, this is the first day back from the New Year's leave for people struggling to get to work. Are you really going to have support for your cause going forward?
Yeah, I think people understand, because you've seen all different kind of industries what's going on. The government are stopping nurses from getting a pay rise, they're stopping us from having a pay rise, they want to rip our terms and conditions up. So I think people and the public understand the severity of what the government are trying to do to the public in this country.
But with it going on for this long, the government are saying you're sort of shooting yourself in the foot because people aren't using the rail. Are they going to come back to using the rail if it does go back to normal?
Well, absolutely. The people that are stood in the picket line behind me worked throughout the Christmas period, and they've been telling me this morning that the trains have been absolutely ram-packed full of people. You know, that paying extortionate fares to stand up on a train for 3 hours to get down to London. It's not acceptable. These shareholders are making millions and millions of pounds a year, whilst our members have not received a pay rise for nearly 4.
So for the moment you're resolute and you'll carry on until you get a deal that you think's acceptable?
Yeah, absolutely. And what we'd ask is the DfT and the government to, you know, unshackle the companies to allow the negotiations to go ahead, because with the things that they've put in place, you know, the driver-only operation and the closure of all ticket offices, it's just not acceptable to the union or our membership.
And would you be willing to speak to Mark Harper, the Transport Secretary, about the deal?
Well, absolutely. Our General Secretary and the negotiation team have been on call all throughout the Christmas period, and I don't believe they've received a call to meet the government ministers or any of the negotiation teams. But our membership want that deal to be done, and they want the dispute to end.
So that's it, this dispute rumbles on here at Leeds train station. The mood of the RMT and workers here is resolute. They want the pay rise, but they also want that safety on the rail and terms and conditions going forward.
Thank you, Anna Riley in Leeds. Well, look, the situation is this. Mick Lynch has told GB News today he wants to talk. Mark Harper has told GB News he wants to talk. Gaz in Leeds just said he wants to talk. Look, we feel like New Year's matchmakers. Can you please just get around the table and talk?
Yeah.
We're getting fed up of not being able to get to work. Thank you very much.
Now, medics are warning that the NHS is on a knife edge as critical incidents are declared in hospital trusts across the country.
It follows a warning from the country's top A&E doctor that delays in the NHS could be the worst on record.
Well, when we were speaking to Mark Harper earlier, we also asked him about the situation in the NHS, and he said the government was listening to the recommendations and fears of the trusts.
We value the people that work in the health service. That's why we have independent pay review bodies that take evidence not just from ministers but also from health unions. All of the health unions and the professional bodies give evidence, and those pay review bodies this last year recommended higher actually than the government had set out in its submission to those pay review bodies, but the government accepted all of those recommendations in full, and that's the pay offer that's been made to unions, and obviously the process for this coming year's starting, and the government will listen very carefully to that. But we accepted all of the recommendations of the independent pay review bodies. I think that's the right way to set pay in the health service, and that's what we continue to do.
OK, that was Mark Harper speaking to GB News earlier in the day. We got him first on the round. Olivia, you join us now in the studio. What do you make of all this? Because, I mean, they keep saying they want to talk and they should get around to talk, but it just doesn't seem to be happening. Is there any way out of this, or are rail strikes just now a part of the British fabric? We'll have to get used to them.
Well, in some respects, it feels like there's a bit of progress. The Sun is reporting today that ministers are considering offering bigger pensions, more bonuses, more holidays as a sort of compromise if they can't offer the pay that train strikers are asking for. But the problem is the sticking point is what the unions would call the safety issue, and what the government would call the reform issue. Yeah. So you've got these driver-only trains, which are in operation in parts of the country already, which the government would like eventually to roll out across large parts of the rail network. But obviously, that wouldn't be very good for train staff because it would mean fewer staff on the trains. And the unions say that to have these driver-only trains would be dangerous. Now, if the government concedes the point that driver-only trains are dangerous, then it will be impossible for it to reform the network anywhere down the line, which means that it's a very tough sticking point for the government. It doesn't want to budge on that. And that's where, even if they can find some sort of compromise over pay, perhaps through pensions, bonuses, holidays, etc., it's hard to see how you break through that barrier.
It's also not true. I mean, they are safe. There's plenty of evidence. I mean, Mark Harper this morning pointed to decades of evidence of where they've been used successfully. And, you know, they can't concede it, yes, because then they would never be able to reform, but also because it's a fact.
Well, yes, and the union workers, the union leaders is being suggested are sticking with this point because they want to keep their unions populated, basically. It's not just the strikers who are worried about this, it's the union leaders themselves, which makes it a highly, highly politically charged issue, even more than it has been previously. So, yes, everyone's saying they want to talk, but without this fundamental sticking point being unstuck, it's hard to see how progress can really be made.
There's a fascinating line on the front of the Times today, which Mr Harper agreed with. Millions will shun trains forever because of these strikes. And in fact, Simon Calder, the travel guru, came in earlier and said precisely that. If the unions aren't careful, people just fall out of the habit, or they won't be able to trust using the trains. They'll be back to their cars. So, in a sense, the longer this goes on, does that benefit the government?
Yeah, well, there's this theory that it's sort of turkeys voting for Christmas, the unions deciding to call this strike now, just when train travel is starting to recover after the pandemic. And we already know that people aren't commuting anymore nearly as much because of work from home becoming so ubiquitous. So people are now using the trains for seeing their family for leisure purposes. And so it's easier for them to find alternatives or just not make those journeys. So the government is pushing very heavily on this line that people are going to shun trains forever. And this feels like something that's been briefed to the Times. It feels as though on this issue the government could be winning the sort of popularity war. We know that support for the train strikers has gone down month on month for the last 3 or 4 months, and even many of the workers in the unions are actually pushing back a bit against the unions, the union leaders at this point. So the government might be a bit winning the popularity war, but as I say, hard to see where we get a breakthrough without these safety concerns.
And the contrast, of course, being with the NHS strikes, you can't just work from home. The equivalent, if you need those services, you need those services. And it certainly seems, although there seems to be this willingness that we've identified between Mick Lynch and the Transport Secretary to talk and everything, Steve Barclay and the unions, I mean, he won't even talk about pay. I mean, there's a bit more intransigence from the Health Secretary, perhaps, in the Department of Transport, and yet there's more public support and need, really, demand for the NHS.
Yeah, I think that we're in a position now where Steve Barclay, actually, from what I've heard, is keen to open conversations because he knows that, you know, his legacy as Health Secretary will be very poor if he's just the Health Secretary presided over a load of strikes. But he's got very little wiggle room from Number 10. I mean, we know that the nurses are asking for 19%, Number 10 is offering 4%. And he now has such a terrible relationship with Pat Cullen, the head of the RCN, that it's very hard to see how you move forward with this. He was put in the position because he's thought of as a big political bulldog. He was Brexit Secretary. He knows how to, you know, play it tough. But perhaps at this point, you don't really want someone playing it tough. So it's tricky to see how those relationships will evolve.
Superb. Olivia Utley, thanks for your insights this morning. Appreciate it.
Now, the Duke of Sussex has claimed that he wants to reconcile with the King and the Prince of Wales in a trailer for an interview to be broadcast this Sunday.
It comes ahead of the release of his much-anticipated memoir, Spare, published a week today. And here's what we can expect.
It needed to be this way. The leaking and the planting. I want a family, not an institution. They feel as though it's better to keep us somehow as the villains. They've shown absolutely no willingness to reconcile. I would like to get my father back. I would like to have my brother back.
Oh, dear. Right, well, let's speak to our royal reporter, Cameron Walker, about all of this. I feel so increasingly frustrated by this because he's throwing these bombs, isn't he, at the institution, as he calls it, continually. Yeah. This idea he wants his brother and his father back, well, he's not going about it the right way. And this idea there's been no offers of reconciliation. The King made a speech when he was when he became the monarch, offering his love and extending his warmth to Harry and Meghan. We saw them invited to the Platinum Jubilee, given central roles there. We saw them also at the funeral of Her Majesty the Queen. There's been so many olive branches.
Yeah, it doesn't quite add up, does it, Isabel? We've got 2 publicity interviews here, one from the United States, one in the UK, for his new memoir, which is being published next week, called Spare. The CBS interview, actually, was very much accusing the palace of planting stories, of making Harry and Meghan look like the villains, very much playing the narrative of what we saw last month with the Netflix docuseries. Meanwhile, ITV's publicity interview was all about reconciling. He wants his brother back, he wants his father back. So the 2 don't really add up, and I think many people are making the arguments that if you're going to slate members of your own family, the chances of them reconciling with you is pretty remote.
I think, Cameron, one of the things that sticks in the craw of a lot of people is this sense that, on the one hand, Harry is, you know, getting his violins out about the fact that the palace has been using the media against him, and yet here he is, continually weaponising media appearances. And I'm particularly galled about the fact that he always uses the American media to attack, you know, British institutions like the royal family, whereas in Britain he's just a little bit more apologetic. Here's a guy that really wants his cake and he wants to eat it as well, but isn't the best thing just to clam up?
Sure. One of the arguments, I think, is perhaps Harry has been backed into a corner because he is now left as a working member of the royal family. He does have to make his own income, and the way he's chosen to do that is by doing all these media appearances, capitalising on the fact he is a member of the royal family still, and unfortunately slamming members of his own family appears to sell, particularly in the United States. We've got this multi-million-dollar book deal that's come out. Obviously, we've got Spare coming out January 10th. There's rumours that Meghan, Duchess of Sussex, is also going to be releasing a new book. There's also rumours of a new self-help book co-authored by the couple. So it's all these appearances which are, I think, perhaps giving the same arguments which we have heard ever since Oprah in 2021, then the Netflix documentary series, but it's the same arguments going on.
When he's saying it never needed to be like this, quite right, Harry, it never needed to be like this. Actually, when you watch the Netflix documentary, my favourite parts of it were when we saw a little insight into Archie and Lilibet and their life in the States and their relationship as a couple. They never needed to do the mocking and the grievances and the victimhood that really puts up everybody's backs, not least the King and the Prince of Wales.
Yeah, I think perhaps what's lost, particularly with Prince Harry, is... Do you remember the Invictus Games that he has created? This brilliant initiative which supports wounded veterans, this Olympic-like competition which really champions what they can achieve having had these horrific injuries. Of course, Prince Harry also serves 2 tours of Afghanistan himself, and yet all of that is lost. All of that publicity that he could create around initiatives such as that isn't happening because he appears to be so focused on talking about his experience as a member of the royal family. And I think to lots of people in a cost of living crisis where people are really having to choose between heating and eating, some people are at least, living in the palace with perhaps having issues with briefings or counter briefings doesn't sit well with people in the UK.
Well, Cameron, we learned this morning the American broadcaster that's got the interview was the only network that published pictures of Diana as she lay dying in her car in Paris. So he seems to have overlooked that. It's all, of course, designed to shift units, to sell books. What's the appetite out there in royal circles to get hold of a copy of Spare? There seems to be quite a few Spare copies knocking around in the bookshops.
Well, there will be next week, that's for sure. And the royal family are not commenting on this. There have been a few sources that said that members of the royal family and courtiers are completely exhausted, which what they refer to as misinformation from the Sussex camp. I think the positive perhaps from Buckingham Palace, if they do that, is that it doesn't cheapen the monarchy. They're focusing on their engagements. They're not getting in this Hollywood-style tit-for-tat argument with the Duke and Duchess of Sussex. But the problem for them by not commenting, I suppose, is that we're only getting one side of the story here. We don't have what Prince William thinks or from what Prince William's perspective or King Charles's perspective as to what went down. We're only going to get Prince Harry.
Right, well, I think we're going to be hearing lots more from him, or at least talking about Spare for many weeks to come, I fear. But for now, Cameron Walker, thank you very much.
OK, and after the break, we're finding out where the UK's speeding hotspots are.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Deebs & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
Why not take us home with you by visiting the GB News shop at gbnews.store. You'll find all the official merchandise, a really good present actually for yourself, your friends or your family.
We ship across the UK mainland at no extra cost. GB News, the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness, brilliant. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
There's a guy who went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
I just want to really quickly reflect some of the views that have come out following something we covered in the papers about children's mental health.
Yeah.
Sandra saying parents need to be parents. Say no to your children, it won't kill them.
And Jeanette says, whilst I accept that lockdown hasn't had an effect on our children, ultimately we have to teach children to come back from disappointment. So again, it's more parent power.
And Angela says, interestingly, over Christmas, I watched as my husband tried to set up my 9-year-old's first device. Trying to implement restrictions on the content he's allowed to access was a complete minefield. Social media is having a negative impact on children's mental health. I'm 100% behind Isabel's idea. Get the campaign going. Gosh, I would quite like to do that. I might have to do that.
I think it's a call to arms for the new year.
Oh, have a think about it.
Okay.
Anyway.
Let's move on now. So, do you live in one of Britain's speeding capitals?
West Yorkshire has actually been deemed the speeding capital of the UK after a recent study found that officers in the region slapped drivers with the largest number of tickets last year.
Avon and Somerset, Thames Valley and the West Midlands also rank highly for dishing out speeding offences. This comes as police report excessive speed was a contributory factor in 19% of deaths.
Well, we're joined this morning by motoring journalist Quentin Wilson. Good morning to you, Quentin. Look, when you relate it to deaths, then automatically we all straight away think fair enough. But a lot of people suspect that these, certainly the camera traps, the ones that aren't bright yellow and visible, are just designed as a sort of local government cash cow.
OK, well, if you look at these figures, you think, OK, we've got a lot of people who are speeding on our roads and that's no good. And let's just begin this by saying, excess speed is a major contributory factor to road fatalities. And whenever possible, you should keep to the speed limit. But if you look at these figures carefully, you've got West Yorkshire as number one with 224,000 speeding tickets issued. That's no surprise because they've got the largest amount of fixed cameras in the UK. So you've got 402 fixed cameras and only 3,600 of those tickets were issued by cops. Then you get down to West Midlands and they've got only 78 cameras and 95,000 tickets. So the more speed cameras you have, the more tickets you issue. You don't have to be Carol Vorderman to work that out. But then we need to say, is this making our roads safer? This speed camera experiment, which has been on since, 1993, does it mean that our roads are significantly safer over that period of time? Well, killed and serious injuries are down, but that could be because of active and passive safety improvements in cars. But the RAC said that this year, 2021, was the worst, the most dangerous for drivers on record. And you've got things like drug driving trebling in 5 years, Drink driving up 13% in 2021, a 7% increase in deaths caused by drink drivers, 9% increase in deaths from dangerous driving, etc., etc., etc. The thing we don't have is police cars, and we need more and more of those. And I think this whole culture of remote policing through cameras is obscuring road safety as an issue. And if you want to slow people down, you do it with the police car because it's mobile, it's visible, and it's a currency that everybody understands. I think the speed camera experiment in this country has failed.
Yeah, same here. And how many of these tickets or do we know of through those cursed average speed traps on motorways where you feel like you're crawling along at a snail's pace and they just go on for mile after mile after mile? Do they work or are they just another rip-off?
Well, again, I mean, average speed cameras are very, very successful indeed for catching people. And if you go into London on the A40, as I do a couple of times a week, it's now the most profitable road when it comes to speed cameras because it is average speed cameras all the way in. So what we need to do with these figures is to drill down and find out how much over the limit people are. Does 3 or 4 miles an hour make you a really, really bad driver? What about the people with no insurance? That's up massively. The people who are on drugs, the people who are drugged. The speed cameras don't catch those. So I think we've really got a situation where we need to sit back, look at these figures and say, what more can we find out about them? And you look at Bradford, which has got one of the highest dangerous driving rates in the country. Why is that? Let's have some research to find out what is affecting this. So I don't think we can take these figures as a great improvement in road safety at all.
OK, listen, we have to leave it there. We are out of time. But Quentin Wilson, always fascinating to speak to you. And thanks for some of your analysis there as well. Appreciate it.
Superb. And that's it from us this morning. We'll be back tomorrow from 6 a.m. Join us then.
Next, it's The Briefing. Have a lovely day.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison? I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday.